My name is Jessica Smith, and for 14 years I believed I was building a life with a man who respected me. I was wrong. It was the night of my 41st birthday. We were sitting in a private dining room at an upscale steakhouse in Huntsville, Alabama. The air smelled of charred oak, bourbon-seared ribeye, and melting beeswax from the centerpieces. 12 of our closest friends sat around the heavy mahogany table, their faces flushed with wine and easy laughter. My husband Preston tapped his crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The sharp chime cut through the low jazz music playing from hidden speakers. He stood up and smoothed the lapels of his custom charcoal suit. He flashed that magnetic Southern charm that had built his real estate empire across the state from the Appalachian foothills down to the sandy Gulf Coast. But when he looked down at me, the warmth in his hazel eyes vanished. They were as cold as winter asphalt. He raised his glass to the room. "To Jessica," he said, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "And to honesty, because there is no point pretending anymore. I want a divorce, and I want you out of the house by Monday." The table went dead silent. A heavy silver fork slipped from someone's hand and clattered against a porcelain plate. The sound pierced the sudden vacuum of the room. Our friends froze, their eyes darting between us, desperate to be anywhere else. Preston kept his focus pinned on me. He stood tall, shoulders squared, waiting for the show. He expected tears. He wanted a hysterical public breakdown he could later package and present to a family court judge to make me look unstable. I did not blink. I kept my posture straight, my hands resting lightly on the starched linen tablecloth. My chest tightened, but I forced my breathing to remain slow and even. Before the humiliation could even sink its claws in, something unexpected happened. A young waiter stepped up to my right side to refill my water goblet. As the ice clinked into the glass, his wrist brushed the table. He slid a small folded receipt directly under the edge of my napkin. He did not make eye contact. He just stepped back and vanished through the swinging kitchen doors. I let my fingers drift to the napkin, sliding the paper into my palm. I smoothed it open beneath the table, hidden from Preston's gaze. Blue ink, hastily scrawled, formed two sharp sentences. He forged the mobile deed. Do not leave the house. Mobile, my aging father's beachfront property. The blood in my veins turned to ice water, chilling me from the inside out. But here is what my husband did not know. As an aerospace logistics auditor, my entire career is built on tracking missing decimal points in defense contracts. I make a living finding the things arrogant men try to hide. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled his life piece by piece, I have a quick question. How old are you right now? Drop your age in the comments, and while you are there, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Emily Told Stories if you believe betrayers always get what they deserve. Now let me tell you how my husband's public trap became his own federal prison sentence. I folded the receipt and slipped it into my clutch. I reached for my goblet and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cold water coated my dry throat, grounding me. Preston was still standing there, basking in the shockwaves of his cruelty. The smug smirk on his face began to falter as the heavy silence stretched on. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He was waiting for a scream that was never going to come. I looked him dead in the eye and let a small, calm smile touch the corners of my mouth. "Okay," I whispered. That single word derailed him. The color drained from his face. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The theatrical confidence he had walked in with evaporated into the dining room air. I pushed my chair back slowly, the wooden legs scraping against the hardwood floor. I stood up and smoothed the front of my silk dress. I turned to our friends whose mouths were still hanging open in shock. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight," I said, keeping my voice steady and light. "I am sorry the evening had to end this way. Please enjoy the rest of the wine on us. I picked up my purse and walked out of the private dining room. I did not look back. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant and stepped out into the warm, humid Alabama night. The thick summer air hit my face, smelling of pine needles and damp asphalt. The valet brought my car around, and I handed him a folded bill before sliding into the driver's seat. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird, but I refused to let the tears fall. The shock of the public ambush was already fading, quickly replaced by the cold, methodical instincts of my profession. As the streetlights of Huntsville flashed past my windshield, I ran through the data points of our marriage. 14 years of shared holidays, corporate dinners, and quiet Sunday mornings on the porch. He had always been ambitious, driven by a need to expand his real estate portfolio. I had admired that drive, assuming we were building a legacy together. But over the last few months, his late nights at the office had turned into unexplained weekend trips. The distance between us had grown into a cold, silent gulf. I had suspected an affair, which was common enough in his circle of wealthy developers. That suspicion was what initially led me to hire Jared, the man pretending to be a waiter tonight. I wanted leverage for a quiet, clean separation. Instead, Jared's preliminary digging had unearthed a labyrinth of fake contracting invoices and missing investor capital. I had reported the corporate fraud to the authorities to protect myself from the blast radius, assuming his crimes were strictly business. The note in my purse changed everything. The mobile deed was the only thing my father owned free and clear. It was a modest beachfront cottage, weathered by Gulf storms and salt spray, but it was his sanctuary. The thought of Preston forging my name to leverage that property made a bitter taste rise in the back of my throat. I pressed my foot harder on the gas pedal. The engine roared as I merged onto the interstate. Preston was terrible with technology. For our entire marriage, he had happily let me manage all the family cybersecurity, the digital vaults, and the shared passwords. It was a fatal vulnerability he had clearly forgotten in his rush to throw me away. His grand divorce announcement was not about him finding freedom or leaving a broken marriage. It was a distraction grenade. He wanted me emotionally destroyed, packing my bags in a panic and leaving the house so I would not look at the financial records. He wanted me blind. He thought he had orchestrated the perfect ambush. He believed a public humiliation would break my spirit, leaving me too embarrassed and frantic to ask questions. He expected me to flee to a hotel, cry to my friends, and hide until the divorce papers arrived. He fundamentally misunderstood the woman he had married. In aerospace auditing, when a system fails, you do not cry over the broken parts. You lock down the perimeter, pull the flight data recorder, and dissect the wreckage until you find the exact point of failure. I put the car in drive and pulled off my exit. I was not going to a hotel. I was going straight home to the Madison suburbs, and I was going to tear his digital life down to the studs. The tires of my sedan crunched against the crushed gravel of our circular driveway. The house loomed in the dark, a sprawling brick colonial in the affluent Madison suburbs. It looked like the ultimate picture of Southern success, complete with perfectly manicured hedges, heavy plantation shutters, and a grand, sweeping entryway. But sitting in the driver's seat, with the engine idling, all I saw was a crime scene. I turned off the ignition and sat in the quiet dark for a moment. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the cooling engine beneath the hood. I grabbed my purse, marched up the brick steps, and punched my code into the security keypad. The green light blinked, unlocking the deadbolt with a heavy, satisfying thud. The interior air felt stale, smelling faintly of lemon polish and the expensive cedar candles Preston insisted on burning. We had a state-of-the-art smart home system, another technical domain Preston had gladly handed over to me years ago because he lacked the patience to understand the programming. I did not turn on the main overhead lights. I walked through the foyer using only the ambient glow of the street lamps filtering through the front windows. The silence of the empty house pressed against my eardrums. Our 15-year-old son, Hunter, was away at a summer baseball showcase in Atlanta. Knowing he was safe and out of state gave me the sharp, unclouded focus I needed to work. I bypassed the kitchen and walked straight up the sweeping oak staircase to the master suite. I pushed open the double doors and went directly into Preston's custom walk-in closet. I flicked on the small recessed light. At first glance, everything looked perfectly normal. Rows of expensive Italian suits hung in color-coordinated alignment, but my eyes are trained to find anomalies. I looked lower. The mahogany shoe racks were half empty. His casual weekend wear, the soft cashmere sweaters, the linen shirts he wore on Sundays, they were all gone. I turned toward the built-in accessory drawers and pulled the top one open. The velvet lining was bare. His collection of heirloom watches, including the vintage piece his grandfather left him, had vanished. I walked back out into the bedroom and checked the corner where he always kept his custom golf clubs. Just empty carpet. This was not a sudden emotional break. This was a methodical extraction. He had been quietly moving his life out of this house for weeks under the guise of frequent business trips. I left the bedroom and walked down the hall to his home office. The room smelled of old leather and stale coffee. I went straight to the built-in bookshelves and pulled a heavy, decorative volume forward, revealing the wall safe. The heavy steel door was hanging wide open. I crouched down and ran my hand along the cold metal interior. Nothing. Our birth certificates, the titles to our vehicles, the deed to this very house, our marriage license, everything was gone. He was trying to strip my identity and my resources before the legal fight even began. He wanted me paralyzed, standing in a dining room in a pretty silk dress, while he held every piece of paper that proved I existed. A sharp buzz vibrated against my hip. I pulled my phone from my clutch. The screen glowed bright in the dim office, displaying a text message from Abigail. Abigail had been my closest confidant for a decade. We had spent countless afternoons drinking iced tea on her wraparound porch, sharing secrets, complaining about our husbands, and watching our children grow up. She was Hunter's godmother. When Preston dropped his divorce announcement at the restaurant, Abigail had been sitting directly across from me, her hand covering her mouth in apparent shock. I opened the message. It read, "I am so sorry about dinner. You can crash at the downtown loft tonight if you need a place to stay. Let me know." I stared at the glowing white letters until they blurred. You can crash at the downtown loft. Preston and I did not own a downtown loft. We did not rent one. We had never even discussed one. I sank into the leather chair behind his desk, the cold reality washing over me. There was only one way Abigail could know about a private apartment. She was the reason he needed it. My chest seized. The idea that my best friend was the architect of my ruin felt like a physical blow to the ribs. She had been sitting there at my birthday dinner drinking my wine, knowing my husband was about to humiliate me in front of our entire social circle. Envy and admiration often wear the exact same face. I had trusted her. I had confided my insecurities to her. Now I assumed she was the mistress helping him hide assets and playing the loyal, devastated friend to my face just to gather intelligence. A familiar anger began to simmer beneath my ribs, hot and sharp. But I pushed it down. Anger is sloppy. Anger makes you type frantic replies and demand immediate answers. I did not text her back. Instead, I turned my attention to the large desktop monitor sitting on the mahogany desk. Preston was arrogant, and arrogant men always leave a digital trail because they believe they are the smartest person in the room. He thought changing his passwords earlier that day was enough to lock me out of our shared financial history. He forgot that I built the secure network he was using. I woke the computer from sleep mode. The password prompt appeared. I typed his usual phrase, and the screen shook, denying access. He had changed it, of course, but he was predictable. I bypassed the login screen entirely by opening a back door through the router configuration. It was an administrative access point I had set up years ago to bypass the firewall when he complained about slow internet speeds. Within 3 minutes, I had routed around his local encryption and mirrored his hard drive onto my secure partition. The screen flooded with folders, hidden spreadsheets, and archived emails. I was no longer a wife, sitting in a dark, empty house grieving a broken marriage. I was an auditor, stepping onto a battlefield. I began my surgical strike. I ignored the personal emails and went straight for the banking ledgers. I needed to know exactly how much he had taken and where he was putting it. I ran a search query for any property leases matching a downtown zip code. The system churned for a few seconds before producing a PDF document. It was a commercial lease agreement for a luxury loft in the heart of Huntsville. I opened the file and scrolled to the signature line. My eyes scanned the black ink. The name on the lease was Abigail. She had rented it in her own name, shielding Preston from any paper trail. But as I dug deeper into the associated bank routing numbers paying that lease, the narrative fractured. The funds were not coming from Preston's personal account. They were being funneled through a corporate shell entity, and Abigail was not the sole beneficiary. I cross-referenced the IP addresses from the bank logins, watching the data paint a much darker picture. Abigail was just a pawn, a convenient local front to handle his physical hiding spots and relay information. The digital footprints led much further away, pointing toward a wealth management firm in the city center, a firm managed by a woman named Natalie. I had just cleared my best friend from the top of the suspect list, only to realize the conspiracy was far more sophisticated than a simple hometown affair. Preston was not just cheating on me. He was moving capital through professional financial channels. And then, as I closed out the banking ledger, my eyes caught a folder sitting alone on the desktop. It was a folder that had been modified just 3 hours before my birthday dinner. The title of the folder consisted of 2 words: Gulf Coast. The glowing pixels on the monitor formed 2 simple words that made the air in the home office feel too thin to breathe. Gulf Coast. My hand hovered over the sleek computer mouse. I had just eliminated my best friend from the center of this conspiracy, realizing she was merely a convenient front for a much larger operation. The true mastermind was a professional wealth manager named Natalie. I double-clicked the folder icon. A single document appeared on the screen, and the remaining breath left my lungs. It was the official property deed for my father's beachfront cottage in Mobile. My dad is 70 years old. He spent 4 decades working the grueling assembly lines at the automotive manufacturing plants up in Huntsville. He saves every spare dollar working overtime and holidays just to buy that small slice of sand on the southern tip of Alabama. I closed my eyes, and a vivid memory washed over me. I was 10 years old, standing barefoot in the warm, shallow tide pools. My dad was teaching me how to cast a fishing line into the rolling surf. The smell of salt spray and coconut sunscreen filled the humid air. He had looked down at me, his face lined from sunburn and factory labor, and told me that the beach house was the only legacy he had left to give our family. It was his sanctuary, his retirement plan, and his pride. I opened my eyes. The harsh blue light of the computer monitor snapped me back to the cold reality of the present. Attached to the digital deed was a secondary financial file. It was a home equity line of credit. I scanned the loan amount and my stomach plummeted. Preston had taken out a staggering sum of money against the cottage. The approval date was stamped just 2 weeks prior. My eyes darted down to the bottom of the last page, searching for the authorization signature. There it was. My name signed in black digital ink. I leaned closer to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. The loops and angles of the cursive signature matched my handwriting flawlessly. But I had never seen this document. Preston had forged my authorization to leverage my father's only asset. As an aerospace auditor, I know how to track digital fingerprints. Documents tell a story that people try to hide. I pulled up the hidden metadata for the file. The loan application had not been signed in this house. The network address logged for the electronic signature traced back to a secure corporate server. I ran the numbers through a domain registry database. The server belonged to the wealth management firm downtown. Natalie's firm. They had colluded. She used her professional credentials to push the fraudulent loan through the banking system without triggering any secondary verification calls to me. The stakes shifted instantly. This was no longer a messy, painful divorce. This was federal wire fraud. Preston was drowning in toxic debt from his failing real estate developments. His hidden spreadsheets proved he was on the brink of total default. If he failed to pay back this line of credit, the bank would not just seize his business assets, they would foreclose on the Mobile property. They would evict my elderly father from his home. Preston was willing to destroy my family to fund his own escape. A cold, surgical precision settled over my mind. The sorrow I felt an hour ago burned away, replaced by the calculating focus of a woman ready to dismantle an empire. If you want to survive a catastrophic failure, you do not panic. You isolate the faulty component and you neutralize it. I worked through the night, ignoring the ache in my shoulders and the exhaustion pulling at my eyes. I downloaded every ledger, every forged document, and every incriminatory email onto an encrypted hard drive. By the time the sun began to peek over the tree line, painting the Madison sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, my phone vibrated on the desk. The clock read 7 a.m. An unknown number flashed on the screen. I answered on the first ring. "Meet me at the diner on County Line Road," a familiar male voice said. I recognized the cadence immediately. It was Jared, the waiter from the steakhouse. I grabbed my keys, locked the house, and drove to the diner. The morning air was already thick with summer humidity, carrying the scent of damp soil and exhaust fumes. The bell above the diner door chimed as I walked inside. The smell of frying bacon and bitter black coffee hung heavy in the air. I found Jared sitting in a back vinyl booth, nursing a ceramic mug. He was no longer wearing his crisp white apron. He wore a faded denim jacket and looked just as exhausted as I felt. I slid into the booth across from him. 6 months ago, I had hired Jared as a private investigator to map the corporate shell companies my husband was using. We were building an anonymous whistleblower file for the Securities and Exchange Commission. I was the anonymous informant. But last night, Jared had gone off script by showing up at my birthday dinner. He slid a thick manila folder across the scratched table. "Your husband is laundering the embezzled investor capital through Natalie," Jared explained, keeping his voice low so the waitress wiping the counter could not hear. "I posed as a waiter last night because I intercepted a highly sensitive wire transfer request just an hour before your party." I opened the folder. Glossy surveillance photographs stared back at me. Preston and Natalie were not just meeting at discreet hotels for a standard affair. The pictures showed them signing documents inside an offshore banking front in Atlanta. "He is moving the money to the Cayman Islands," Jared continued. "He chose your birthday to announce the divorce, because Natalie closed on a luxury property in the Caymans yesterday morning. He wanted you emotionally shattered. He needed you packing your bags, crying to your friends and feeling too distracted to check your joint accounts before he drained them. The true scope of the trap snapped into focus. The corporate embezzlement I had been tracking was now dangerously intertwined with my family's survival. Jared leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine with intense urgency. "We need your final audit of his internal shell companies to complete the federal file," Jared said. "But more importantly, we have to intercept that offshore wire transfer before the bank opens on Monday morning, or your father loses everything." I stared at the photographs, tracing the outline of my husband's smiling face as he stood next to the woman helping him steal my life. He thought he had outsmarted everyone. He thought he had left me scrambling for a place to sleep. But arrogant men always underestimate the people they exploit. "I will finish the audit by tonight," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "But I am not just stopping the transfer. I am going to freeze every single asset tied to his name." Jared raised an eyebrow, a flicker of respect crossing his tired features. "If you freeze the accounts, he will know you are onto him. He will retaliate." "Let him," I said. "I want him to panic." I left the diner with the manila folder tucked under my arm, the ticking clock of Monday morning echoing in my mind. I needed to beat him to the bank. But as I pulled into my driveway an hour later, a strange vehicle was idling by my front curb. A man in a cheap gray suit stepped out, holding a thick manila envelope. He walked toward me with purposeful strides. Before I could even unlock my front door, he handed me the envelope, tipped his chin, and walked away. I ripped open the seal right there on the porch. It was a formal, legal summons. Preston was not just filing for divorce. He had spent the morning filing an emergency petition in family court. He was demanding immediate sole custody of our 15-year-old son. I stood on the front porch, the harsh morning sunlight baking the concrete steps beneath my feet. The thick manila envelope felt unusually heavy in my hands. I slid my thumb under the adhesive flap, tearing the stiff paper open. A dense stack of legal documents slid into my palm. The bold black letters at the top of the first page read, "Emergency Petition for Sole Custody." My breath caught in my throat. Preston was not just trying to take my dignity and my father's beachfront cottage. He was coming for Hunter. I walked back inside, locking the heavy mahogany door behind me. I dropped my purse on the entryway table and carried the papers into the kitchen. The granite island felt cold under my forearms as I spread the pages out. I read through the affidavit, and with every paragraph, the true depth of his cruelty came into sharp focus. Preston had painted a masterful, entirely fabricated picture of an unstable, deeply depressed woman prone to erratic behavior. He cited my sudden, emotionless departure from the birthday dinner as proof of my psychological detachment. He claimed I abandoned him and our guests in a fit of manic paranoia. He even attached a character assessment from a licensed therapist I had never met in my life. The letter detailed a fictional history of untreated anxiety and recommended inpatient care. My hands shook, rattling the crisp white paper against the stone counter. Preston had never been a hands-on father. He missed baseball games, skipped parent-teacher conferences, and treated Hunter more like a photo opportunity for his real estate brochures than a son. Why would a man preparing to flee to a non-extradition tax haven tether himself to a bitter, high-profile family court battle over a teenager? It made zero logical sense. Unless Hunter was the key to the money. I left the kitchen and sprinted up the stairs back to his home office. The encrypted hard drive was still plugged into my laptop. I sat down, my mind racing through the financial data I had compiled overnight. I pulled up the reversed lien documents from the mobile property. I stared at the forged signature again. My name written in perfect digital ink. The home equity line of credit was approved, and the funds had been routed to an intermediary holding account before supposedly moving to the Caymans. I opened the routing ledger. I traced the alphanumeric strings matching the intermediary account to the offshore destination. The wealth manager, Natalie, had set up the shell corporation receiving the stolen investor capital. But as I clicked into the beneficiary details of that specific offshore trust, the blood drained from my face. The primary account holder was not Preston. It was not Natalie. The account was registered under a 9-digit identification code. I recognized the numbers instantly. I had filled them out on school enrollment forms, medical records, and Little League rosters for 15 years. It was Hunter's Social Security number. A sickening wave of nausea washed over me. The spousal betrayal paled in comparison to this profound moral failure. Preston was laundering millions of stolen dollars through accounts tied directly to his own child. If the federal authorities caught wind of the embezzlement, the paper trail would point straight to a high school sophomore. Preston would play the ignorant, trusting father, claiming his unstable wife must have orchestrated the fraud. He was willing to risk our son's entire future, risking federal prison time for a teenager, just to shield his own stolen fortune. He needed sole custody to gain unquestioned legal guardianship over Hunter's identity. With me out of the picture, designated as mentally unfit by a fake therapist, Preston would have total control over the shadow accounts. I pushed my chair back from the desk. The sheer audacity of his plan was breathtaking. But he had made a critical miscalculation. He assumed I would break down, cry, and hide. He forgot he married an aerospace auditor. I grabbed my keys and a manila folder containing the genuine financial ledgers. I drove straight to the main branch of our local bank in downtown Huntsville. The glass doors slid open, welcoming me into the air-conditioned lobby. I walked past the teller line and requested an immediate meeting with the branch manager, a woman named Diane, whom I had known for a decade. Diane ushered me into her glass-paneled office, offering a polite smile that faded the moment she saw my expression. I sat in the leather chair across from her desk and placed my identification, my marriage license, and my Social Security card on the polished wood surface. I need to freeze every joint asset tied to my name, I said, keeping my voice level and firm. Every checking account, every savings reserve, every line of credit. I need a hard lock placed on all outbound wire transfers, effective immediately. Diane blinked her professional composure, slipping. Jessica, a total freeze will bounce any pending transactions. It will paralyze your daily operations. Are you sure you want to initiate this without Preston present? I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto hers. I am certain. If you allow one single dollar to leave those accounts today, this bank will be complicit in federal wire fraud. She swallowed hard, her fingers flying across her keyboard. The typing echoed in the quiet office. Within 10 minutes, she handed me a printed confirmation. The vault was sealed. The offshore transfer Natalie tried to initiate for the Cayman Islands property would bounce. The embezzled funds were trapped. I walked out of the bank with the confirmation receipt folded in my pocket. The Alabama sun beat down on the pavement, radiating heat through the soles of my shoes. I had just severed Preston's financial lifeline. I knew the retaliation would be swift. I unlocked my car door, sliding onto the hot leather seat. Before I could even start the engine, my cell phone rang. The screen displayed a contact name I had not expected to see today. It was Virginia Preston's mother. Virginia was a prominent Huntsville socialite. She spent her days chairing charity galas, maintaining a pristine public image, and treating people like disposable chess pieces. She viewed reputation as currency. We had always maintained a cordial, surface-level relationship, built mostly on forced holiday dinners and polite small talk. I pressed accept and lifted the phone to my ear. "Jessica, sweetie," her voice purred through the speaker. It dripped with saccharine manipulation, thick as molasses. "Hello, Virginia," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Preston called me this morning." She sighed, a breathy, theatrical sound. "He tells me things are getting ugly between you two. I am just heartbroken, truly. But for Hunter's sake, we need to handle this quietly. Do you not agree?" I watched a delivery truck idle at the intersection ahead. "I am handling it, Virginia." She lowered her voice into a conspiratorial whisper. "Preston showed me the preliminary settlement he drafted. It is very generous. He is willing to take on all the heavy business debts and let you walk away clean. You should just sign it, sweetie. You do not want the stress of a custody trial. You have always been so fragile under pressure. We both know you need time to heal." I gripped the steering wheel. Her words echoed the exact sentiments written in the fake therapist letter submitted to the family court. Fragile, unstable, needing time to heal. Virginia had never once taken an interest in her son's corporate finances. She avoided discussions about his real estate developments, claiming numbers gave her a headache. So why was she suddenly advocating for him to assume all the business debt? An instinct flared in my mind. The metadata. When I audited the fake psychological evaluation from the custody affidavit earlier that morning, I had traced the digital footprint of the document. The author's credentials belonged to a private psychiatric clinic in the neighboring county. I had not finished investigating the clinic itself, but the phone call provided the missing link. I pulled my laptop from the passenger seat, resting it on the center console. I tethered it to my phone's cellular data and typed the name of the psychiatric clinic into the state business registry. The web page loaded, displaying the board of directors. Right there, listed as the primary financial backer and sitting chairwoman, was Virginia. She was not just a concerned grandmother trying to broker peace. She had actively procured the forged medical document from her own clinic. She weaponized her charitable connections to help her son steal my child and access the fraudulent accounts. The betrayal layered the family conflict over the legal one, thickening the toxic web they had woven around me. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "I appreciate your concern for Hunter," I said smoothly, ensuring no trace of the burning anger leaked into my voice. "But I think we will let the legal mediators sort out exactly who is taking on the debt." "Jessica, be reasonable," Virginia snapped, her sweet facade cracking. "You do not want to start a war you cannot win." I smiled, though she could not see it. "The war is already over, Virginia. You just do not know you lost yet." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. The trap was set. Preston was out of money, locked out of his accounts, and relying on forged documents that I could now trace directly to his mother. He was about to feel the walls closing in. And desperate men are prone to making fatal mistakes. I put the car in drive, ready to turn my attention to the wealth manager who thought she could steal my father's house. I tossed my phone onto the passenger seat. The leather felt scorching against my bare legs. The Alabama midday sun glared through the windshield, casting harsh shadows across the dashboard. My bank manager had secured the funds, and Virginia had unwittingly confirmed her role in the custody ambush. But stopping a single transaction was akin to putting a bandage on an arterial wound. Preston still held the forged mobile deed, and the SEC still needed the final audit of his corporate shell game. I put the car in drive and navigated away from the downtown financial district. I headed toward the industrial outskirts of Huntsville, where abandoned textile mills had been converted into quiet workspaces. I pulled into the gravel lot of an independent coffee roaster. This was the rendezvous point Jared and I had agreed upon earlier that morning. A secondary location far from my husband's usual social circles. The heavy glass door swung open, greeting me with a blast of air conditioning and the rich, dark aroma of roasted espresso beans. The cafe was nearly empty, occupied only by a few college students wearing headphones and typing on laptops. I spotted Jared sitting in a dimly lit corner booth. He wore the same faded denim jacket from the diner, but now a sprawl of financial printouts covered the wooden table in front of him. A half-empty iced coffee left a ring of condensation on the polished surface. I slid into the booth opposite him, dropping my manila folder and laptop beside his papers. "Did you lock down the accounts?" he asked, keeping his tone low. His eyes scanned the perimeter of the room before meeting mine. "The primary vaults are frozen," I replied, wiping a bead of sweat from my collarbone. "The outbound wire for the offshore transfer will bounce, but that is only a temporary roadblock. Preston is resourceful, and he has co-conspirators." I did not anticipate. Jared leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. He pushed a glossy photograph toward me. "We have bigger problems than temporary roadblocks, Jessica. Look at this." I picked up the photo. It showed a sprawling, modern architectural marvel perched on a cliffside overlooking turquoise water. Floor-to-ceiling windows reflected a tropical sun. "That is a multi-million-dollar estate in the Cayman Islands," Jared explained, tapping the image with his index finger. "Natalie closed on the property the morning of your birthday dinner. She used a specialized escrow account funded by the initial wave of embezzled investor capital. Preston orchestrated the divorce announcement as a psychological smokescreen. He needed you devastated, locked out of the house and distracted by a messy separation, while they finalized the remaining capital flight." I stared at the pristine white walls of the island house. He wanted to fund a tropical paradise using the stolen equity from my aging father's beachfront cottage. The sheer entitlement made my jaw tighten. "The bank freeze will buy us time," Jared continued, tracing a line on a printed ledger with his pen. "But Natalie is a senior wealth manager. She possesses the administrative clearance to bypass standard banking delays. If she realizes the primary funds are locked, she will liquidate the secondary corporate assets. We need your final logistical audit of his internal shell companies to complete the SEC file. Once the federal agents have that, they can secure federal warrants." I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating the dim corner of the booth. "The audit is almost done," I said, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "But the parameters of the investigation just expanded. The corporate embezzlement and the Cayman Island purchase are only half the operation." Jared frowned, picking up his iced coffee. "What did you find?" I opened the manila folder I had brought from the house. I slid the reversed lien documents and the custody affidavit across the table. "He is not just stealing from his investors. He forged my signature to leverage my father's property. And worse, he is funneling the stolen capital through shadow accounts registered under Hunter's Social Security number." Jared froze the glass, halting halfway to his mouth. He set it down slowly. "He is using his own teenage son as a federal shield." "Yes," I stated, my voice devoid of emotion. "If the authorities trace the wire fraud without our context, the digital fingerprints point directly to a high school sophomore. Preston filed for emergency sole custody this morning. He wants legal guardianship over Hunter so he can control those accounts without my interference. He even procured a forged psychological evaluation to paint me as an unfit mother." "Who wrote the evaluation?" Jared asked, his investigative instincts sharpening. I turned my laptop screen toward him, displaying the state business registry page. "The clinic is funded and chaired by Virginia, his mother. She is providing the medical cover he needs to steal my son and access the offshore trusts." Jared ran a hand through his hair, exhaling a long, steady breath. "This is not just white-collar crime anymore. This is a coordinated family syndicate. The SEC focuses on investor protection, but identity theft of a minor and real estate forgery fall under separate jurisdictions. We need to categorize the evidence perfectly before handing it over to the marshals." I nodded, pulling a fresh spreadsheet onto the screen. In aerospace logistics, you learn how to categorize catastrophic failures by system. We separate the data. You take the corporate embezzlement, the shell companies, and the Cayman property wire transfers. Finalize that package for the SEC. I will handle the forged mobile deed and the wealth manager. You cannot confront Natalie without leverage, Jared warned, his brow furrowing. She operates in a highly regulated industry. She knows how to cover her tracks. She left a track she cannot erase. I countered, highlighting a specific row of numbers on the screen. The missing decimal point. When I audited Preston's logistics ledger 6 months ago, I found a recurring anomaly. A decimal point shifted in the supply chain invoices, skimming fractions of percentages into a holding account. I traced that specific holding account this morning. The IP address linked to the inbound deposits belongs to a terminal inside Natalie's downtown firm. She used her own professional credentials to authorize the theft. Jared leaned closer, studying the screen. If you take that to the authorities, she faces mandatory minimums. I am not taking it to the authorities yet, I replied, closing the folder. I am taking it directly to her. I need her to panic. I need her to reverse the lien on my father's property immediately. If she knows the federal government is hours away from kicking down her door, she will sever ties with Preston to save herself. There is a ticking clock, Jared said, pulling a secondary file from his bag. It was a printed flight manifest. My contact at the regional airfield flagged this an hour ago. Preston booked a private charter flight. Destination is Grand Cayman. Departure is scheduled for Friday evening. Today is Wednesday, I noted, my eyes locking onto the departure time. We have 48 hours before he leaves the country. If he boards that plane, the money goes with him, and Hunter is left holding the bag for a federal crime, Jared added grimly. He is not boarding that plane. I promised, the icy resolve hardening in my chest. For the next 3 hours, we sat in that corner booth, turning the small coffee shop into a tactical command center. I utilized every analytical skill I had honed over a decade of auditing defense contracts. I mapped the exact flow of stolen capital from the original investor deposits through the fake real estate development invoices and into Natalie's wealth management portals. I built an airtight, irrefutable timeline that connected the forged medical documents to Virginia and the stolen Social Security number to Preston. We drank bitter espresso and spoke in hushed, clinical terms, stripping the emotion away from the betrayal. I was not a heartbroken wife weeping over a ruined marriage. I was a structural engineer dismantling a condemned building. Every piece of evidence was a load-bearing pillar we were preparing to kick out. By early afternoon, the final audit was complete. I transferred the encrypted file onto a secure flash drive and slid it across the wooden table. Jared pocketed the drive, his expression serious. I will deliver this to the Federal Task Force Coordinator tonight, he said, gathering his papers. Once they verify the Cayman wire transfers and the identity theft, they will secure the arrest warrants. But it takes time to mobilize. You have to keep Preston comfortable. You have to make him believe his plan is working. I will, I answered, packing my laptop into my leather tote. I am agreeing to a formal divorce mediation. It will keep him focused on the domestic battlefield while the federal net closes around him. What about the wealth manager? Jared asked, standing up from the booth. I slung the tote over my shoulder, the weight of the evidence grounding me. I am going to pay her a visit right now. Confident people who steal for a living rely on the silence of their victims. She expects me to be a grieving housewife. I am going to show her exactly what an aerospace auditor looks like when her family is threatened. I walked out of the coffee shop, leaving the smell of roasted beans behind. The harsh afternoon sun glared against the pavement, but I did not feel the heat. My target was clear. I climbed into my car, programmed the GPS for the glass-paneled high-rise in the city center, and prepared to confront the woman who thought she could erase my existence. The drive toward the downtown financial district took 20 minutes. The highway traffic moved sluggishly, giving me ample time to rehearse the upcoming conversation. In my profession, Negotiations are won before anyone speaks a single word. You win by holding the undeniable facts and allowing the other party to hang themselves with their own excuses. Natalie operated in a world of polished veneers, marble lobbies, and client confidentiality agreements. She believed her corporate shield made her untouchable. She believed Preston's narrative that I was weak, fragile, and ignorant of their grand design. As the towering glass skyscrapers of Huntsville came into view, reflecting the bright blue southern sky, I reviewed the leverage I held. The forged signature on the home equity line, the IP addresses linking her terminal to the embezzlement, the Cayman Island real estate closing documents. She was a licensed fiduciary. Her entire career, her freedom, and her pristine reputation hinged on her adherence to financial law. She had risked everything for a man who was currently using his own son as a legal human shield. I wondered if she even knew about the stolen Social Security number, or if Preston was playing her just as thoroughly as he had played me. I pulled into the subterranean parking garage beneath her building. The concrete walls echoed with the sound of my tires. I parked in a visitor space, turned off the engine, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was pulled back into a neat, severe knot. My tailored suit looked sharp, professional, and unyielding. There were no dark circles under my eyes, no tear streaks on my cheeks. I looked like a woman arriving to close a hostile takeover. I stepped out of the car, the rhythmic click of my heels echoing through the empty concrete structure. The elevator ride to the 14th floor felt like an eternity, the numbers ticking upward as the pressure built in my ears. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a lavish reception area. Cream-colored leather sofas sat on plush carpets, surrounded by abstract art and towering potted orchids. The receptionist, a young woman wearing a headset, looked up with a polite, practiced smile. "Welcome to Sterling Wealth Management," she greeted, her tone bright. "How may I direct you today?" The first phase of the trap was set. The federal warrants were being drafted. Now it was time to isolate the co-conspirators and watch the syndicate crumble from the inside out. I stepped up to the reception desk, placing my hands flat on the cool marble counter. "I am here to see Natalie," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Tell her Jessica is here, and tell her we need to discuss a beachfront property in Mobile." The young woman behind the marble reception counter freezes. Her manicured fingers pause mid-keystroke, hovering over her illuminated keyboard. The mention of a specific real estate asset slices through the sterile corporate script she was trained to follow. She picks up her phone receiver, her voice dropping to an urgent, hushed whisper. I wait in the lobby, keeping my posture unyielding. I stare at a sprawling, abstract painting on the wall until the heavy, frosted glass doors at the end of the hallway swing open. Natalie stands in the threshold. She wears a tailored navy blazer and a silk skirt that projects the image of a seasoned, untouchable executive. Her blonde hair is arranged in a flawless blowout. But I am an auditor, and my career is built on noticing fractures in structural integrity. I see the micro-expressions she tries to hide. Her jaw is rigid. Her steps are a fraction too stiff. She knows exactly who I am, and she knows I do not belong here. "Step into my office," Natalie says, her tone crisp and practiced, attempting to regain control of the environment. I follow her down the quiet corridor and into a spacious corner suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows offer a sweeping view of the downtown Huntsville skyline, a silent testament to the wealth she manages. She walks behind a vast mahogany desk, deliberately putting a physical barrier between us. She gestures toward a leather guest chair. I ignore the invitation and remain standing. "Jessica, I am unsure what Preston has told you, but I am bound by strict fiduciary regulations," she begins, lifting her chin. "I cannot discuss my clients or their portfolios with unauthorized individuals." I open my leather tote. I pull out the single piece of paper I brought from the coffee shop and place it flat on her immaculate desk. It is the routing ledger for the Cayman Island transfer, paired with the digital signature logs from the Mobile property lien. "We are not talking about Preston," I reply, my voice low, steady, and devoid of warmth. "We are talking about you. You used your firm administrative credentials to authorize a fraudulent home equity line against a house you knew belonged to my father. You forged my signature to leverage a retirement property." Natalie glances down at the paper. The blood drains from her cheeks, leaving her skin looking like old parchment. Her confident posture crumbles instantly. She sinks into her ergonomic chair, her eyes darting frantically across the highlighted IP addresses that trace directly back to her personal terminal. "I did not forge anything," she stammers, her voice losing its polished edge. "Preston provided the authorization forms. He assured me you signed them during a mediation session." "Ignorance is a terrible defense in federal court," I say, leaning forward and placing both hands firmly on the edge of her desk. "The Securities and Exchange Commission loves white-collar whistleblowers, Natalie, but they send accomplices to federal prison. You facilitated wire fraud across state lines." She shakes her head, attempting to reconstruct her shattered reality. "Preston is transferring his legitimate business capital to secure a new investment property. You are just a bitter spouse trying to disrupt a divorce proceeding." A bitter spouse. The phrase hangs in the air, echoing the exact narrative Preston had spun to everyone in our circle. I reach into my tote and pull out the second document, the thick manila envelope I received on my porch that morning. "My husband did not just file for divorce," I explain, dropping the legal petition onto her desk right on top of the routing ledger. "He filed for emergency sole custody of our 15-year-old son, Hunter." Natalie frowns, confusion threading through her panic. "What does a custody dispute have to do with my firm?" I flip open the affidavit, pointing to the paragraphs Preston had submitted to the judge. He painted a masterful, entirely fabricated picture of me as an unstable, deeply depressed woman prone to erratic behavior. He cited my sudden, emotionless departure from my own birthday dinner as legal proof of a psychological break. He used the spectacle he created as evidence of my detachment. But Preston does not want Hunter. He has never wanted the responsibility of being a father. He wants control. I tap the Cayman Island routing numbers. "I audited the offshore trusts you established for him in the Caribbean. The shadow accounts holding the stolen investor millions are not registered in Preston's name. They are not in your name either." I pause, letting the silence stretch until the tension in the room is suffocating. "He set them up using Hunter's social security number," I state. Natalie stops breathing. Her eyes widen, staring at me in unvarnished horror as the puzzle pieces snap together in her mind. By securing sole custody, I continue tracing the legal logic for her. Preston gains total guardianship over those offshore trusts. He plans to flee to the tropical estate you just purchased, leaving my teenage son holding the legal liability for millions of dollars in stolen capital. He is framing his own child to shield his fortune. The spousal betrayal, the infidelity, the lies, they all pale in comparison to this profound moral failure. He is weaponizing our son to fund his escape. Natalie stares at the documents, her hands trembling. She is not just a mistress helping a wealthy developer hide assets from his wife. She is the central node in a syndicate executing identity theft against a minor. "If the marshals trace this without context," I say, my tone dropping to a whisper, "they will see your terminal authorizing deposits into a fraudulent account registered to a 15-year-old boy. That is not just financial mismanagement, Natalie. That is a predatory felony." She swallows hard, pressing her manicured fingers against her temples. The glamorous illusion of her island escape shatters, leaving only the grim prospect of a federal indictment. "What do you want?" she asks, her voice hollow and defeated. "I want the lien on the mobile property reversed," I command. "I want the debt dissolved, and I want certified proof of the cancellation sent to my house by tomorrow morning. If my father property is not cleared in 24 hours, I hand the unredacted IP logs to the federal task force." I do not wait for her to agree. I pick up my tote, turn on my heel, and walk out of the corner office. I navigate the plush carpets of the reception area and step into the elevator. The doors slide shut. For the first time all day, I am alone. The adrenaline crests and recedes, leaving a sharp, aching hollow in my chest. My husband is willing to sacrifice our son. The man who taught Hunter how to throw a baseball, the man who stood beside me in the delivery room, is actively orchestrating his destruction. A heavy pressure builds behind my eyes, stinging and hot. But I do not cry. Crying is a luxury I cannot afford until the war is won. I step out of the office building and into the stifling Alabama heat. I drive straight to the main branch of my bank in the city center. I had secured a temporary hold on the accounts over the phone earlier, but now I need to make the freeze irrevocable. I march into the manager's suite sitting across from Diane. I sign page after page of sworn legal declarations, officially freezing every joint asset, every line of credit, and every shared investment portfolio. The ink on the paper feels like a binding oath. Preston is now cut off from his domestic capital. I walk back to my car, the formal bank receipts folded in my pocket. The financial pipeline is severed, and his wealth manager is neutralized. I am finally ready to address the custody ambush head-on. As I unlock my car door, my cell phone vibrates in my purse. I glance at the screen. The caller ID displays the main office number for the Atlanta baseball showcase where Hunter is staying. I press accept, my pulse quickening. This is Jessica. "Mrs. Smith," a frantic voice says on the other end. It is the camp director. "I am sorry to bother you, but there is a situation. Your husband just arrived at the facility with a local sheriff deputy. He presented a court order and is demanding to pull Hunter from the dormitory." My blood turns to ice. Preston realized his funds were trapped, and now he is accelerating his timeline. The financial battlefield just turned physical. The camp director's voice shook with anxiety through the car speaker. "Mrs. Smith, your husband is standing in the dormitory lobby. The local deputy is telling me I have to release your son right now." My heart slammed against my ribs, but the analytical auditor inside my brain took the wheel. Panic is a luxury I could not afford. I gripped the leather steering wheel, staring blindly through the windshield at the concrete wall of the parking garage. "Listen to me very carefully," I instructed, my voice dropping an octave, radiating cold authority. "My husband filed an emergency ex parte custody motion in Madison County, Alabama, less than 4 hours ago. Atlanta is in Georgia. State lines matter. An Alabama family court order possesses zero physical jurisdiction in another state unless it has been properly domesticated by a Georgia judge." The line went quiet for a fraction of a second. "Put the deputy on the phone," I demanded. A moment later, a deep, hesitant voice answered. "Ma'am, this is Deputy Miller." "Deputy, I am the boy's mother. You are currently attempting to enforce an unverified, out-of-state civil order without a domesticated warrant. If you remove my son from that private facility, I will immediately contact the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and report a state-sponsored interstate kidnapping." Silence stretched over the cellular connection. I could hear the faint sound of a baseball game happening somewhere in the distance. "I need to see the judge's signature on a domesticated Georgia warrant," I continued, pressing the advantage. Do you have that document in your hand right now? No, ma'am, the deputy admitted, his tone shifting from authoritative to uncomfortable. Mr. Smith just showed up at the precinct with the Alabama paperwork, claiming a medical emergency. There is no medical emergency. My husband is currently under investigation for federal wire fraud, and he is attempting to use my son as a financial shield. Tell him to leave the premises or I am calling your commanding officer. Muffled voices echoed through the phone. I heard Preston shouting in the background, his southern charm entirely stripped away, replaced by the raw, frantic anger of a cornered animal. A minute later, the camp director came back on the line. He breathed a heavy sigh of relief. The deputy told him to leave, the director whispered. Your husband is furious. He just walked out the front doors. Keep Hunter on the campus, I said, the tension draining from my neck. Do not let him out of your sight. I will handle the rest. I ended the call and leaned my forehead against the steering wheel. The leather felt hot against my skin. Preston had tried to snatch our teenage son from a summer camp just to secure a social security number for his offshore bank accounts. He was willing to traumatize his own child to save his stolen empire. Any lingering fraction of sorrow I felt for the collapse of my 14-year marriage evaporated in that parking garage. My husband was a monster, and monsters do not deserve mercy. I put the car in gear and drove out into the blinding afternoon sunlight. As I merged onto the interstate, heading back toward the suburbs, my phone began to vibrate incessantly. The dashboard display lit up with a barrage of automated text messages. The financial freeze was taking effect. My bank manager had done her job flawlessly. The notifications indicated a cascade of declined transactions. Preston was in Atlanta, likely trying to secure a hotel room, retain local legal counsel, or purchase plane tickets, and his credit cards were rejecting every single swipe. The liquid cash he relied upon to fund his arrogance was gone. The Grand Cayman Island escape was officially paralyzed. He was stranded penniless and stripped of his leverage. I knew he would not call me. His pride would never allow him to admit defeat to the woman he had publicly humiliated the night before. He would call his ultimate safety net. He would call the woman who taught him how to manipulate the world. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. The caller identification displayed a familiar Huntsville number. It was Virginia Preston's mother. Virginia is a prominent local socialite who views public image as the highest form of currency. She spends her afternoons chairing country club galas, arranging floral centerpieces, and treating service workers like disposable chess pieces. She raised Preston to believe that wealth pardons all sins. During our marriage, she and I maintained a brittle, superficial relationship built on forced holiday smiles and passive-aggressive critiques of my wardrobe. I pressed the accept button on the steering wheel interface. Jessica, sweetie, she purred. Her voice dripped with a thick, saccharine manipulation that made my skin crawl. I am just heartbroken, truly devastated. Hello, Virginia, I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the highway ahead. Preston just called me from Georgia, she sighed, delivering a breathy, theatrical performance. He tells me things are getting ugly between you two. He said you locked the bank accounts. Sweetie, you are acting rashly. For Hunter's sake, we need to handle this quietly. Do you not agree? I am handling it, I answered, my tone neutral and unyielding. Virginia lowered her pitch into a conspiratorial, soothing rhythm. Preston showed me the preliminary settlement he drafted this morning. It is very generous, Jessica. He is willing to take on all the heavy business debts from his real estate developments. He will shoulder that burden so you can walk away clean. You should just sign the paperwork, sweetie. You do not want the stress of a brutal custody trial. We both know you have always been so fragile under pressure. You need time to heal. Fragile. The word hung in the air inside the car cabin. It was the exact terminology written in the psychological evaluation Preston had submitted to the family court judge to prove my instability. Virginia had never once taken an interest in her son's corporate finances. She despised conversations about debt, claiming discussions of money were vulgar. Yet here she was, explicitly advocating for Preston to assume all the business liabilities. She wanted me to sign away my rights to the corporate ledgers because she knew the offshore money was hidden inside those specific accounts. An investigative instinct flared in my mind. The metadata. Earlier that morning, when I was sitting in my home office, auditing the fake therapist letter Preston used for the custody ambush, I had run a diagnostic check on the digital file. In my profession, documents always leave a trail. Every PDF contains hidden, exchangeable image file format data revealing the authoring software, the creation timestamp, and the registered owner of the computer terminal. I had traced the digital footprint of the forged medical document to a private psychiatric clinic in the neighboring county. I had not finished investigating the clinic itself, assuming Preston simply bribed a rogue physician. But listening to Virginia carefully selected words, the final missing connection clicked into place. I pulled my car onto the shoulder of the highway, shifting into park. I grabbed my laptop from the passenger seat, flipped it open, and tethered it to my cellular data. I typed the name of the psychiatric clinic into the state corporate registry database. The web page loaded, displaying the board of directors and the primary financial benefactors. Right there, listed as the sitting chairwoman and majority shareholder, was Virginia. She was not just a concerned grandmother trying to broker a peaceful divorce. She had actively procured the forged medical documents from her own clinical staff. She used her charitable connections to fabricate a psychiatric diagnosis, weaponizing her medical board seat to help her son steal my child. She knew about the affair. She knew about the offshore accounts. She was an active co-conspirator, facilitating the identity theft of her own grandson. The betrayal was absolute, layering a toxic family conspiracy over the legal one. They thought I was a naive, heartbroken wife they could easily manipulate into signing away my life. I pressed the phone closer to my ear. "I appreciate your concern for Hunter," I said smoothly. I drained every ounce of emotion from my vocal cords, leaving only cold, hard steel. "I am glad you are seeing reason, sweetie," Virginia replied, her tone brightening with false relief. "I will have Preston attorneys send the settlement over tonight." "Do not bother," I stated, staring at her name on the clinic registry screen. "I think we will let the federal mediators sort out exactly who is taking on the debt, and exactly who signed the medical evaluations." The line went dead silent. The saccharine warmth evaporated from Virginia's breathing. She recognized the specific threat in my words. "Jessica!" She snapped, her sweet facade cracking, revealing the vicious matriarch underneath. "You do not want to start a war you cannot win. You will ruin this family." "The war is already over, Virginia," I answered softly. "You just do not know you lost yet." I tapped the red icon on the screen, terminating the call. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and merged back onto the highway. Preston was neutralized in Atlanta. His wealth manager was cornered in her downtown office. His mother was now legally exposed for medical fraud. I had systematically severed every tentacle of his support network, but stripping an arrogant man of his power makes him dangerous. He would return to Huntsville desperate, humiliated, and looking for vengeance. I needed to build an ironclad legal trap before he resorted to unpredictable tactics. I could not face him in a standard divorce proceeding. I needed a setting where his own hubris would finalize his destruction. It was time to return home, refine the financial ledgers, and prepare for the final confrontation. I returned to the empty house in Madison and locked the deadbolt. The silence wrapped around me thick and heavy. I walked past the foyer and entered the formal dining room. This space was designed for entertaining. It featured a long mahogany table where I had hosted Thanksgiving dinners and corporate holiday parties for a decade. Today, it became a war room. I retrieved the encrypted hard drive, my work laptop, and a stack of printed banking ledgers. I arranged them across the polished wood surface in precise chronological order. I brewed a pot of dark roast coffee and set a ceramic mug beside my keyboard. For the next 4 days, I did not leave that room. I barely slept. I ignored the emotional sting of a shattered 14-year marriage. Heartbreak is a useless metric. It distracts from the data. I focused solely on the numbers. In my line of work, precision is everything. As an aerospace logistics auditor, I track billion-dollar defense contracts. I hunt for discrepancies in supply chains that stretch across the globe. A single missing decimal point in a fuel calculation can crash a satellite into the ocean. It can cause a catastrophic engine failure mid-flight. In this dining room, a missing decimal point was going to crash my husband. I started with the digital footprints. I pulled the raw data from his printed emails and cross-referenced the origin points with the list of corporate shell companies Jared had provided. I traced the IP addresses attached to every single invoice Preston had approved over the last 2 years. The pattern emerged slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. Preston was running a classic overbilling scheme. He solicited legitimate capital from wealthy investors to fund commercial real estate developments across the Gulf Coast. But the construction costs reported on his internal ledgers did not match the market rate for materials. He was invoicing his own dummy corporations for supplies that never existed. He funneled the excess money through fake contracting invoices, bleeding his investors dry month after month. The stolen funds flowed into a holding account managed by Natalie. From there, the money was supposed to vanish into the Cayman Island trusts registered under my son's stolen identity. But the pipeline was currently severed. My bank freeze had worked. The realization of that freeze hit Preston on Tuesday afternoon. My phone sat on the edge of the dining room table, silent for 2 days. Then the screen illuminated. A text message arrived. Then another. Then 5 more in rapid succession. The soft chime of the notifications became a relentless drumbeat in the quiet house. I picked up the device and scrolled through the incoming barrage. The progression of his panic was fascinating to watch. His initial messages dripped with his usual condescending arrogance. He demanded I lift the hold on the checking accounts, claiming a clerical error was disrupting his business payroll. He ordered me to call the bank manager and fix my mistake. When I did not reply, his tone shifted. The southern charm evaporated, replaced by frantic threats. He promised to call the local police and report me for grand larceny. He threatened to ruin my reputation among the Huntsville social elite, swearing he would tell everyone I had suffered a total psychological breakdown. He texted that I would never see Hunter again, bragging about the emergency custody petition he had filed. Every notification was a testament to his desperation. He was stranded in Georgia, his credit cards declining his offshore transfer paralyzed, and his mistress waiting for funds that were never going to arrive. He was losing control, and the loss of power was driving him to the edge of reason. I read his final threat, a long paragraph detailing how he intended to leave me penniless and broken. I tapped the reply icon. I kept my response cold, concise, and devoid of emotion. Talk to my attorney. I hit send and placed the phone face down on the table. The truth was, I did not actually have an attorney yet. I had not retained legal counsel because introducing a lawyer at this stage would force the conflict into a predictable courtroom timeline. Family court judges favor mediation cooling off periods and equitable distribution. I had no intention of being equitable. I was buying time. I needed Preston to feel the walls closing in. I needed the silence to deafen him. When a narcissist faces an opponent who refuses to engage, they project their own worst fears into the void. I wanted his panic to fester, forcing him to make sloppy mistakes. And by Thursday morning, the data revealed his inevitable error. I was reviewing the reverse lien documents from my father's beachfront property. While my local bank freeze had stopped Preston from moving his liquid cash, the home equity line of credit was an entirely separate financial instrument. The debt was originated and managed by Sterling Wealth Management, Natalie's firm. I refreshed the digital ledger for the mobile property. A new pending transaction flashed in yellow text. Preston had logged into the portal from a hotel internet connection in Atlanta. Desperate for any available liquidity, he was attempting to bypass the frozen checking accounts by drawing a direct cash advance against my father's home equity line. He was trying to drain the stolen equity and wire it directly to a secondary offshore account before the federal authorities noticed. The transaction status read, pending administrative approval. It required a manual override from the wealth manager on file. Natalie had to push the button. The stakes spiked, sending a rush of cold adrenaline through my veins. The domestic battlefield was shifting again. Preston was cornered, striking out blindly to salvage his tropical escape. If Natalie approved that cash advance, my father would instantly owe a staggering sum of money to a commercial lender, and the cash would be untraceable in a Caribbean bank. I closed my laptop. The 4 days of silent auditing were over. The evidence was compiled, verified, and ready for deployment. But I could not afford to wait for federal warrants to protect my family. I had to sever the final link in Preston's financial chain. I had to confront the woman holding the administrative keys to my father's ruin. I walked upstairs and opened my closet. I bypassed the casual summer dresses and pulled out a tailored charcoal suit. I needed armor for the incoming engagement. I was not going to send an email. I was not going to make a phone call. I was going to walk directly into the glass-paneled fortress of Sterling Wealth Management and deliver an ultimatum. The mistress thought she was dealing with a discarded wife. She was about to learn what happens when you cross an auditor who knows where every single body is buried. Confident men, stripped of their power, always overplay their hands. Preston thought he could bypass the frozen bank accounts by liquidating the stolen equity in my father's beachfront cottage. He was pulling the levers of his crumbling empire from a hotel in Atlanta, but those levers were connected to a desk in downtown Huntsville. Before he could finalize the cash advance I needed to secure the property, I did not text him back. I did not call my lawyer. On a Thursday afternoon, I drove into the financial district. The summer heat radiated off the concrete sidewalks in shimmering waves, distorting the reflections in the towering glass skyscrapers. I parked my sedan in the subterranean garage beneath the Sterling Wealth Management building. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was pulled back into a severe, sleek knot. The tailored charcoal suit I wore felt like a layer of armor. I looked nothing like the fragile, emotionally shattered woman Preston had described in his family court affidavit. I took the elevator to the 14th floor. The polished steel doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a reception area designed to intimidate. Cream-colored leather seating arrangements rested on thick imported rugs. Abstract sculptures adorned the corners, and panoramic windows offered a commanding view of the city skyline. It was an environment engineered to project security and compliance. It was the perfect camouflage for a criminal syndicate. A young receptionist sat behind a curved marble desk wearing a discreet headset. She offered a bright, practiced smile as I approached. "Welcome to Sterling Wealth Management," she greeted, her tone rehearsed. "How may I direct you today?" I am here to see Natalie, I replied, maintaining a steady, unblinking gaze. Do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked, her fingers hovering over a sleek keyboard. Natalie is currently preparing for a client portfolio review and cannot be disturbed. I did not wait for her to finish typing. I stepped around the marble counter and walked directly down the main corridor. The receptionist called after me, her voice rising in alarm, demanding I stop. I ignored her. The hallway was lined with frosted glass panels, each one concealing a senior wealth manager. I reached the corner suite at the far end. A silver placard mounted beside the heavy oak door bore Natalie's name and her title as Senior Vice President of Offshore Assets. I gripped the brass handle, turned it, and pushed the door open. The office was vast, bathed in natural sunlight filtering through the panoramic windows. Natalie sat behind an expansive mahogany desk, tapping a stylus against a digital tablet. She wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp silk blouse. Her blonde hair fell in perfect, deliberate waves. She exuded the polished arrogance of a woman who managed millions of dollars for Huntsville's elite. She looked up, annoyed by the interruption. Then her eyes locked onto my face, and the blood drained rapidly from her cheeks. The tan, healthy glow of her skin vanished, replaced by the pale sheen of genuine shock. She knew exactly who I was. Natalie dropped the stylus. It clattered against the wood surface. She pushed her ergonomic chair back, the wheels catching slightly on the carpet. She raised her hands in a defensive posture, her chest heaving. She braced herself. She expected a theatrical spectacle. She anticipated a screaming match, a hysterical wife throwing accusations and demanding answers about the affair. She thought I was going to weep over a broken marriage. I closed the heavy oak door behind me. The click of the latch severed the ambient noise of the corridor, sealing us in a suffocating silence. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a tear. I walked slowly across the plush carpet, the rhythmic tap of my heels echoing off the glass walls. I reached the guest chair positioned opposite her desk and sat down. I crossed my legs, rested my hands on my lap, and let the quiet stretch until the tension in the room grew almost unbearable. Natalie swallowed hard. "Jessica," she stammered, her polished executive persona cracking under the weight of the silence. "You cannot be in here. I am bound by fiduciary confidentiality protocols. I have to ask you to leave, or I will summon building security." I opened my leather tote. I bypassed my phone and my wallet, reaching for a single sheet of paper I had printed earlier that morning from my dining room war room. I placed it flat on the center of her immaculate desk, right over her digital tablet. "We are not here to discuss your clients," I stated, my tone devoid of heat. "We are here to discuss your own personal liability." Natalie hesitated, her eyes darting toward the closed door before dropping to the paper. It was the routing ledger for the Cayman Island holding account. Highlighted in bright yellow was the pending cash advance Preston had requested from Atlanta just 3 hours prior. The request was tethered directly to the home equity line of credit, secured against my father's mobile property. The transaction status flashed a warning, indicating it required a manual authorization override from the senior wealth manager on file. She stared at the numbers. The alphanumeric strings connected her terminal to a fraudulent loan originated under a forged digital signature. "I do not care that you are sleeping with my husband," I said, keeping my voice level and conversational. "Infidelity is a domestic issue. It is irrelevant to me. What I care about is the fact that you utilized your firm's proprietary credentials to authorize a fraudulent wire transfer against a house you knew belonged to a 70-year-old man." Natalie pulled her hands back from the desk as if the paper were engulfed in flames. "I did no such thing," she lied, her vocal cords tightening. "Preston provided the authorization forms. He assured me." You signed the loan application during a mediation settlement. I was simply executing a legal directive from a primary account holder. Ignorance is an incredibly weak defense in a federal indictment, I countered, leaning forward slightly. I rested my elbows on the armrests of the leather chair. You are a licensed fiduciary. You understand the mandated verification protocols for secondary asset leverage. You bypass them because Preston promised you a tropical escape. I tapped the routing ledger with my index finger. The pending cash advance he just requested is designed to drain the remaining equity from the coastal property and funnel it into an offshore trust, I continued. You are holding the administrative key. If you push the approval button, you finalize the theft. Natalie shook her head, a frantic energy seizing her movements. Preston is transferring legitimate corporate capital to secure a Caribbean investment, she argued, though her voice lacked any real conviction. You are just trying to disrupt a complex divorce. You are trying to sabotage his business out of spite. I studied her face, searching for the depth of her complicity. She genuinely believed the narrative Preston had constructed. She thought the money was his. She did not comprehend the scale of the trap closing around her. Preston does not possess any legitimate corporate capital, I explained, dropping my voice to a dangerous whisper. He is operating a systemic overbilling scheme. He embezzled millions from his real estate investors. The funds you transferred to the Caymans last week were stolen. And worse, the offshore trusts you established to receive that money are not registered in his name. Natalie stopped breathing. He registered those accounts using the social security number of my teenage son, I revealed, watching the truth detonate behind her eyes. He filed for emergency sole custody this morning so he could gain legal guardianship over the stolen funds. He is framing a high school sophomore for federal wire fraud, and you are the financial architect making it possible. The glamorous illusion of a new life in the islands shattered instantly, leaving nothing but the grim reality of a federal investigation. As a wealth manager, Natalie knew the mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines for interstate embezzlement and identity theft. She knew the Securities and Exchange Commission did not offer leniency to licensed professionals who facilitated fraud. You have 24 hours, I said, rising gracefully from the leather chair. You will reject the pending cash advance. You will reverse the lien on the mobile property. You will dissolve the debt entirely. And you will ensure a certified cancellation receipt is delivered to my house by tomorrow morning. I picked up my tote and turned toward the oak door. If my father's property is not cleared by dawn, I warned, pausing in the threshold, I hand the unredacted digital logs linking your personal computer terminal to the forged signatures directly to the federal authorities. They will not ask you to leave your office politely. They will escort you out in handcuffs. I walked out into the corridor, leaving her trembling in the quiet sunlight. The first pillar of Preston's escape route had been kicked out, but isolating the mistress was only a preliminary maneuver. I needed to ensure my son was shielded from the impending fallout. As I stepped into the elevator, my phone vibrated in my pocket, displaying a calendar alert I had set 3 days ago. Hunter's baseball showcase in Atlanta was ending tomorrow. The timeline was compressing, and Preston was running out of shadows to hide in. Natalie stammered, attempting a half-hearted denial. She gripped the edge of her massive mahogany desk, her manicured nails digging into the polished wood until her knuckles turned bone white. The professional, untouchable aura she projected just 5 minutes earlier had completely evaporated. Client confidentiality agreements prevent me from discussing specific account parameters with anyone who is not the primary account holder, she whispered. Her voice lacked any actual conviction. It was a flimsy corporate shield, and she knew it. I did not raise my voice, nor did I break eye contact. I simply leaned over the desk and tapped the single sheet of paper resting between us. The Securities and Exchange Commission absolutely loves corporate whistleblowers, Natalie, I said, keeping my tone conversational, but laced with venom. But they send accomplices to federal prison. You bypassed mandatory verification protocols. You forged my signature to leverage a 70-year-old man's home. That is not a clerical error. That is wire fraud across state lines. She stared down at the meticulously documented IP addresses. Her eyes traced the lines of code I had printed out, eventually landing on the specific anomaly I had highlighted in bright yellow ink. It was the missing decimal point that tied her personal office terminal directly to the Cayman Island holding accounts. The glamorous illusion of her tropical escape with Preston shattered in an instant. I watched the realization wash over her features, pulling the color from her cheeks. She was a senior wealth manager who had spent years studying financial law. She knew exactly what federal mandatory minimums looked like. They did not involve pristine beaches, infinity pools, or luxury villas. They involved concrete walls, wire fences, and heavy steel doors. I left her sitting there in the suffocating silence of her corner office. I walked back to the elevator, the thick hallway carpet absorbing the sound of my footsteps. I descended to the subterranean parking garage and drove back to the Madison suburbs. Thursday evening stretched into a miserable, sleepless night. I sat on my living room sofa in the dark, watching the antique grandfather clock in the hallway tick away the hours. The financial trap was fully set, but the leverage over my father's property remained active until Natalie actually processed the administrative reversal. She had 24 hours to choose between her misguided loyalty to Preston and her own freedom. I gambled everything on the assumption that self-preservation would override her affection for a married man. Friday morning arrived, bringing a thick layer of dense Alabama humidity that fogged the exterior windows of my house. The sky was a hazy, pale gray. I brewed a cup of black coffee and stood by the front door waiting. The anxiety gnawed at the edges of my focus, threatening to break my clinical detachment. My father had spent 40 years breaking his back on automotive assembly lines just to buy that small piece of coastal sanctuary. If I failed to protect it, the guilt would ruin me long before the divorce ever did. At exactly 9 a.m, a white delivery van pulled into my circular driveway. The gravel crunched loudly beneath its heavy tires. A courier stepped out, wearing a brown uniform, carrying a digital clipboard and a thick cardboard mailer. I opened the heavy front door before he could even ring the bell. He handed me the package, requested a quick signature on his electronic screen, and walked back to his truck without saying a word. I carried the parcel into the kitchen and dropped it onto the granite island. My hands were surprisingly steady as I gripped the perforated edge of the cardboard and ripped it open. Inside rested a thick, sealed envelope bearing the embossed gold logo of Sterling Wealth Management. I tore it open and pulled out a stack of dense legal documents printed on heavy stock paper. I scanned the first page rapidly, skipping the boilerplate legal jargon, my eyes darting straight to the official notary stamp at the bottom of the sheet. It was a certified declaration from the bank. The home equity line of credit on the Mobile property had been fully dissolved. The fraudulent lien was officially reversed, and the initial loan application had been flagged and canceled under administrative review. The encumbrance was gone. My father was safe. The beachfront cottage remained entirely his, free and clear of Preston's toxic debt. He would never even have to know he had almost lost his retirement home to the greed of a son-in-law he had always treated like family. With the personal stakes neutralized, a profound sense of clarity washed over me. I no longer had to operate on defense. I walked into the formal dining room, sitting down at the polished wooden table that had served as my war room for the past few days. It was time to finalize the weapon that would dismantle my husband completely. I opened my laptop and began compiling the evidence. I organized the raw data files into distinct encrypted directories, applying the same rigorous methodology I used when auditing billion-dollar defense contractors. The first folder contained the corporate ledgers, detailing the systemic overbilling scheme Preston used to bleed his real estate investors dry. I included the fake contracting invoices, the inflated supply chain receipts, and the corresponding bank deposits. The second folder held the offshore routing numbers. I attached the IP logs linking Natalie's terminal to the Cayman Island transfers and the missing decimal point anomalies that proved the money was moving systematically. The third folder was the most devastating. It housed the digital footprint of the fake psychological evaluation tracing the medical forgery directly to Virginia's private psychiatric clinic. It also contained the official banking documentation proving Preston had used Hunter's Social Security number to register the shadow trusts. I gathered every email, every furious text message he had sent me from Atlanta, and every forged signature connecting Preston, Natalie, and his mother into a single narrative of coordinated theft and child exploitation. I transferred the entire package onto a high-capacity encrypted hard drive. I locked the drive with a complex alphanumeric passcode, ejected it from the computer, and slipped the small metal rectangle into the pocket of my jacket. I drove to a public park on the edge of town. A sprawling green space filled with towering oak trees, winding walking trails, and a large duck pond. Jared was waiting for me on a wooden bench near the water edge. He wore a faded baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, blending perfectly with the mid-morning crowd of joggers and young mothers pushing strollers. I sat down on the far edge of the bench, keeping a respectful distance to avoid drawing any unnecessary attention. The warm summer breeze rustled the leaves overhead, masking our conversation from anyone walking past. "Did the wealth manager comply?" Jared asked, keeping his gaze fixed on the water reflecting the morning sun. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the encrypted hard drive. I palmed it to him in a swift, seamless motion. "She complied," I answered, watching a mallard duck glide across the surface of the pond. "The lien on my father's property is completely gone. Natalie severed the offshore connection to save herself. The financial pipeline is officially dead." Jared slipped the drive into his jacket pocket. He nodded slowly, a look of profound relief crossing his tired features. "I will deliver this to the Securities and Exchange Commission Regional Director this afternoon. The federal task force has been waiting for this final audit. With this undeniable evidence, they can secure the arrest warrants by Monday morning. Preston is coming back to Huntsville today." I noted the reality of the impending collision settling into my chest. The baseball showcase in Atlanta is over, and his credit cards are frozen. He cannot run. He will return, desperate, angry, and looking for a target. Jared turned to look at me, his expression grave and concerned. "That is exactly why you need to be careful, Jessica. He knows he is losing control of his liquid cash, but he still thinks he holds the upper hand with the emergency custody petition. He believes he can use the threat of taking Hunter away to intimidate you into a quiet settlement." "I know exactly what he believes," I said, standing up from the wooden bench and smoothing the wrinkles from my skirt. "That is why I am hiring a corporate litigator this afternoon. I am going to invite my husband to a formal divorce mediation." Jared furrowed his brow, clearly confused by the strategy. "Why would you agree to sit in a room with him? The federal marshals are going to arrest him anyway. Let them handle it." "Because arrogant men do not just need to lose," I explained, looking down at the investigator who had helped me uncover the darkest corners of my marriage. "They need to understand exactly who beat them. I am going to let him sit across from me and present his demands. I am going to let him believe he has cornered me. And then I am going to watch him realize that I was always 3 steps ahead. Now that my father and son were shielded from the immediate blast radius, I was ready to detonate the main charge. The defensive phase of my operation was officially over. It was time to go on the offensive. To spring a trap of this magnitude, I needed a legal architect who understood the intricate machinery of corporate destruction. I needed someone who viewed a courtroom not as a place for equitable compromise, but as a theater of war. I drove away from the public park and navigated toward the sleek commercial district bordering the Huntsville Space and Rocket Center. I pulled into the parking lot of a boutique law firm known for handling the most vicious, high-net-worth divorces in the state. I had an afternoon appointment with a woman named Veronica. She was the most ruthless corporate litigator in Alabama, a forensic attorney who specialized in unspooling complex white-collar marriages. Veronica had built her reputation by dismantling corrupt executives and wealthy developers who thought they could hide their assets behind offshore trusts. She grew up in the steel mill shadows of Birmingham, fighting her way through law school with a razor-sharp intellect and a profound intolerance for arrogant men. The receptionist ushered me into a corner office featuring a sprawling view of a Saturn V rocket replica towering over the horizon. Veronica sat behind a minimalist glass desk. She wore a tailored crimson blazer, her dark hair cropped into a sharp, efficient bob. She did not offer me a warm, comforting smile or ask how I was holding up emotionally. She simply gestured toward the leather chair opposite her and folded her hands over a pristine legal pad. "Tell me what we are hunting," Veronica instructed, her voice crisp and commanding. I sat down, placed my leather tote on the floor, and pulled out my laptop. I did not waste her time with tears or stories about my ruined birthday dinner. I spoke her language. I detailed the systemic overbilling scheme Preston used to defraud his real estate investors. I explained the offshore routing protocols, the forged medical evaluation, and the fraudulent lien he had attempted to place on my father's property. Then I revealed the parallel federal investigation hovering directly over my husband's head. I am the anonymous whistleblower who initiated the Securities and Exchange Commission inquiry 6 months ago, I stated, turning my laptop screen toward her to display the encrypted audits. My investigator just delivered the final unredacted ledgers to the federal task force. Warrants are being drafted as we speak. Preston is facing impending charges for interstate wire fraud, investor embezzlement, and the identity theft of a minor. Veronica leaned forward, her sharp eyes scanning the digital columns of stolen capital. A slow, genuine smile spread across her face. Most clients walk into this office begging for half of a retirement account, she noted, pulling a silver pen from her blazer pocket. You walked in handing me a federal indictment wrapped in a bow. I do not want an equitable distribution of his assets, I clarified, keeping my tone perfectly level. I want to secure sole physical and legal custody of my son. And I want to ensure my husband is locked in a room where he cannot maneuver his way out. To achieve that, Veronica said, tapping her pen against the glass desk, we cannot file a standard divorce petition through the public docket. A public filing will trigger a discovery period. If his defense attorneys see the financial subpoenas, they will instantly recognize the federal exposure. They will advise him to flee the country immediately, or they will bury us in endless procedural motions. We need to trap him before the marshals arrive. I agreed. Veronica nodded, her legal strategy forming instantly. We invite him to a private binding mediation. We frame it as a surrender. We spent the next 2 hours drafting the formal mediation request. Veronica constructed the communication to sound exactly like a letter written on behalf of a terrified, exhausted mother. The email implied that the emergency custody petition had successfully broken my spirit. It suggested I was deeply fearful of a brutal public trial and simply wanted to finalize a quiet separation to protect my son from the fallout. We offered to let Preston assume the bulk of the corporate debt in exchange for a modest alimony and keeping my vehicle. It was a beautiful piece of legal bait, perfectly tailored to feed his towering hubris. Veronica transmitted the digital request to his retained counsel just before 5 in the evening. We formally agreed to meet Preston for the divorce mediation the following Tuesday morning. Preston took the bait without a single moment of hesitation. His lawyer responded within an hour, eagerly accepting the terms and locking in the date. Preston believed his intimidation tactics regarding Hunter custody had finally forced me into submission. He thought the frozen checking accounts were merely a desperate, temporary inconvenience I had initiated out of spite, and that my sudden willingness to mediate meant I was abandoning the financial fight altogether. He thought I was coming to the table to wave a white flag. He spent the entire weekend basking in his perceived victory. Unwilling to return to the Madison house, he remained holed up in a luxury hotel suite. Since I had severed his primary banking lines, he resorted to using his secondary corporate credit channels and obscure business ledgers to gather whatever liquid cash he could still access. He dedicated Saturday and Sunday to moving those remaining domestic funds. He sat in his hotel room transferring thousands of dollars into the shadow accounts tied to Hunter's Social Security number. He believed he was cleverly bypassing my bank freeze, funneling the last of his stolen wealth into the pipeline designated for the Cayman Islands. He operated under the assumption that his digital movements were secure, shielded by the complex corporate layers he had spent years building. He was entirely unaware that Jared and the Securities and Exchange Commission were monitoring every single keystroke. The federal task force had secured a real-time surveillance warrant based on the evidence we provided on Friday. They possessed direct oversight of the exact routing networks Preston was utilizing. Every time my husband authorized a transfer, every time he moved a single dollar across state lines to fund his tropical escape, he generated a fresh digital receipt for the authorities. He was literally building his own prison cell from the inside. Every click of his mouse added another irrefutable count of wire fraud to his inevitable indictment. While Preston spent his weekend desperately compounding his federal crimes, I spent my weekend in a state of profound, unexpected peace. Saturday evening, I sat on the back porch of the Madison house. The heavy, humid Alabama air settled over the neighborhood, carrying the familiar scent of blooming magnolia trees and fresh-cut grass. The rhythmic hum of cicadas echoed from the tree line, creating a soothing, steady soundtrack to the fading daylight. I held a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, letting the warmth seep into my palms. I watched the sun dip below the Appalachian foothills in the distance. The sky ignited in brilliant shades of crushed violet, burnt orange, and deep crimson. For the first time since Preston tapped his crystal glass at my birthday dinner, the crushing weight in my chest dissolved. The tightness that had wrapped around my ribs, the cold anxiety of facing financial ruin and losing my son, simply vanished. It was replaced by a remarkable, buoyant lightness. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, bitter flavor. I did not feel any lingering sorrow for the end of my marriage. You cannot mourn the loss of an illusion, and the man I thought I married had never truly existed. He was merely a polished facade hiding a hollow, calculating predator. The trap was perfectly set. The federal warrants were signed and waiting in the hands of the marshals. Veronica had prepared an ironclad disclosure document that would force Preston to commit perjury in a recorded legal setting. The wealth manager was neutralized, the mother-in-law was exposed, and my father, beachfront sanctuary, was entirely safe. Tuesday morning was rapidly approaching. My prey was walking directly into the snare, guided by his own unshakable arrogance, marching toward his destruction with a confident smile on his face. All I had to do was show up, take my seat at the conference table, and wait for the heavy oak doors to swing open. Tuesday morning dawned with a clear, unforgiving southern sun that baked the Huntsville pavement. I drove into the downtown district, parking my sedan 3 blocks away from the neutral legal facility we had chosen for the mediation. Veronica walked beside me, her heels clicking a steady, rhythmic cadence against the concrete. She wore a tailored black suit that looked like Kevlar armor, her posture radiating an apex predator confidence. We did not speak during the walk. We had rehearsed the engagement parameters thoroughly, mapping out every potential variable like a pre-flight launch sequence. The building itself was a sterile monolith of reflective glass and brushed steel, designed to house high-stakes corporate disputes. We took the silent elevator to the 7th floor, stepping into a suite engineered specifically to drain the emotion out of volatile family conflicts. A hushed receptionist directed us down a long carpeted hallway and into a windowless conference room. The space felt deliberately oppressive. Pale gray walls offered zero visual distraction. A long faux wood table dominated the center of the floor, surrounded by heavy ergonomic chairs. The low, constant hum of the ventilation system pressed against my eardrums, smelling faintly of ozone and filtered dust. We took our seats on one side of the table, arranging our sparse folders. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak door swung open, breaking the artificial silence. Preston walked in, flanked by 2 highly compensated attorneys. I recognized them by reputation. They were notorious litigators, known for burying opposing counsel in endless procedural delays, ruthless intimidation tactics, and sheer financial attrition. They wore pristine Italian wool suits, carrying thick leather briefcases, projecting an aura of calculated invincibility. Preston, however, looked severely frayed around the edges. The weekend spent frantically funneling stolen funds from a hotel room in Georgia had taken a visible physical toll. Dark circles shadowed the skin beneath his hazel eyes, standing out starkly against his usually perfect tan. His posture lacked its usual effortless athletic symmetry. Yet despite the sheer exhaustion radiating from his frame, he still wore a smug, patronizing smirk. He believed he was entering a room to collect an unconditional surrender from a broken woman. He took the seat directly across from me. He unbuttoned his custom jacket, leaning forward, resting his forearms heavily on the table. He did not offer a greeting. He did not acknowledge Veronica. He simply stared at me, his gaze laced with triumphant, undisguised contempt. One of his lawyers, a tall man with silver hair and a sharp, angular jawline, opened his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, the pristine white pages rustling loudly, and organized them into neat, precise piles. The mediator, a neutral third party, seated at the head of the long table, cleared his throat and began reciting the standard confidentiality disclaimers required by state law. I barely registered the mediator's monotonous voice. My focus remained entirely surgically pinned on my husband. Preston did not wait for the formal introductions to conclude. He reached across the wide expanse of the table, sliding a bound financial disclosure form toward me. The heavy paper stopped just inches from my folded hands. "I am willing to be generous, Jessica," he stated, his voice dripping with forced magnanimity. He used the exact tone a frustrated teacher might use to scold a slow, stubborn pupil. I let my eyes drop to the thick document, reading the bold black title on the cover sheet, then raised my gaze back to his face. I did not offer a verbal response. "I know the past week has been incredibly difficult for you." Preston continued leaning back into his chair. He crossed his arms over his chest, projecting total unyielding dominance. "I understand you are struggling to process the reality of our separation. For the sake of our son, I want to make this transition as painless as possible for everyone involved." Veronica sat perfectly still beside me, her expression a masterclass in blank neutrality. She did not interrupt his monologue. We needed him to lay all his cards on the table. "I am taking the company debts," Preston declared, delivering his orchestrated, deceitful script. My commercial real estate developments carry significant liabilities right now. The market is shifting. I will shoulder that financial burden entirely. You keep your vehicle free and clear. I will also provide a modest monthly alimony to ensure you can maintain a quiet, modest lifestyle without needing to secure immediate employment. He paused, letting the heavy silence stretch across the room, waiting for my profound gratitude. When I offered nothing but a steady, unblinking stare, his smirk hardened into a scowl. But I get primary physical and legal custody of Hunter, he finalized, his tone dropping an octave, carrying a thinly veiled, vicious threat. You are in no condition to raise a teenager right now. We both know you need time to focus on your mental health. Sign the settlement today, and I will not drag your psychological evaluation through a public courtroom. I will keep your instability out of the public record. The sheer audacity of his performance was genuinely breathtaking. He was attempting to extort me using a forged psychiatric letter fabricated by his own mother, while simultaneously trying to secure legal guardianship over our son to shield his stolen offshore millions. I looked down at the financial disclosure document resting on the table. In family law, this packet is not a casual optional spreadsheet. It is a sworn legal affidavit. By affixing his signature to the final page, Preston was legally certifying under penalty of perjury that the listed figures represented the absolute entirety of his assets and liabilities. I opened the heavy cover page and slowly turned the crisp white sheets. My eyes, trained by a decade of auditing aerospace supply chains, scanned the numerical columns with clinical precision. The numbers detailed his local checking accounts, the failing real estate portfolios in the Appalachian foothills, and the remaining balance on his standard credit cards. The omissions were glaring, spectacular, and entirely deliberate. He had excluded the Cayman Island holding accounts. He had omitted the offshore shell companies registered under Hunter's Social Security number. He conveniently forgot to list the home equity line of credit he had attempted to secure against my father's beachfront property. The millions of dollars he had embezzled from his investors were nowhere to be found on these pages. He was intentionally hiding a vast criminal enterprise inside a sworn court document, adding state-level perjury to his rapidly mounting pile of federal felonies. I turned to the final page. His signature rested on the bottom line, scrawled in bold blue ink, legally validating the deception. I closed the folder and rested my fingertips lightly on the cover. I turned my head slightly, catching Veronica's eye. She offered a microscopic nod, a silent, imperceptible confirmation that the trap was fully primed and the perimeter was secure. Are you entirely certain this is a complete list of your assets and liabilities, Preston? I asked quietly. My voice was calm, steady, and devoid of the terror he so desperately expected to hear. One of his attorneys shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing a subtle, dangerous shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. The silver-haired lawyer narrowed his eyes, studying my unbothered posture. But Preston remained entirely oblivious, blinded by his own towering, insatiable hubris. He scoffed, letting out a short, mocking laugh that echoed off the pale gray walls. He uncrossed his arms and leaned heavily over the table, bringing his face closer to mine, invading my space. I have nothing left to hide from you, Jessica, he sneered, his hazel eyes flashing with arrogant, vindictive amusement. I am leaving the country next week for a fresh start, a new venture. I am moving on. You should do the exact same thing. Just sign the paper and let this be over. The dramatic irony hung thick and heavy in the windowless room, almost suffocating in its intensity. The stale air felt charged, crackling with unseen electricity. Preston sat there, flanked by expensive legal counsel, bragging openly about his impending escape to a tropical paradise, entirely unaware of the catastrophic reality unfolding just beyond the drywall. He truly thought he had won the war. He believed he had thoroughly outsmarted a fragile, discarded wife. He had no idea that I had spent the last 6 months auditing his digital footprints. He did not know his wealth manager had already surrendered the offshore routing logs to save herself from an indictment. He did not realize his own mother was legally exposed for medical fraud. And most importantly, he did not know exactly who was currently standing in the hallway, waiting for my silent signal. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer and pulled out a silver pen. I clicked the top, the sharp metallic sound cutting through the artificial silence of the conference room like a gunshot. I pulled the heavy financial disclosure form closer to my chest and flipped it open to the final signature page. Preston's smug grin widened, fully expecting to witness my final humiliating surrender. His attorneys relaxed their shoulders, leaning back in their chairs, assuming the negotiation had concluded without any genuine resistance. I hovered the tip of the pen over the dotted line. I let it linger there for a long, agonizing moment, watching Preston's anticipation peak. The triumph radiated from his exhausted features, a toxic mix of relief and malice. Then I set the pen down on the table. The silver barrel rolled across the faux wood grain, coming to a rest against the edge of the disclosure binder. I looked directly into his eyes, watching the confusion slowly, deliciously replace the triumph on his face. "I do not think I will," I said. I said the words quietly, but they landed on the faux wood table like a localized seismic event. Preston's mocking laugh died in his throat. His hazel eyes narrowed, trying to decipher if I was bluffing or simply delaying the inevitable. Before he could formulate a response, and before his highly compensated legal team could voice an objection to my refusal, the atmosphere in the suite shifted forever. The heavy oak door of the conference room did not just open, it breached. The thick wood swung backward, slamming against the pale gray drywall with a resounding, bone-rattling thud that shook the framed abstract prints on the wall. The sudden concussive noise fractured the sterile artificial silence of the neutral legal facility. Preston attorneys sprang to their feet instantly, their expensive leather chairs rolling backward across the carpet. The silver-haired lawyer raised his hand, his face flushing with immediate, practiced indignation. He shouted a sharp, booming reprimand, citing the strict confidentiality statutes of a closed-session family court mediation. He demanded the intruders leave the suite immediately, threatening severe judicial sanctions, bar complaints, and immediate contempt charges for interrupting a protected legal proceeding. The men walking through the doorway ignored him. 3 federal marshals strode into the windowless room. They did not wear tailored suits or carry leather briefcases. They wore dark utility uniforms layered under heavy tactical vests. Their gold badges caught the harsh fluorescent light overhead, gleaming with an undeniable, terrifying authority. They moved with a synchronized, heavy precision that sucked the oxygen out of the enclosed space. Walking closely behind the marshals was Jared. He was no longer dressed in the crisp white apron of an upscale steakhouse waiter, nor was he wearing the faded denim jacket from the coffee shop. Today, he wore a sharp charcoal blazer, holding a thick bound stack of official warrants. His posture was rigid professional and radiating a quiet, dangerous intensity. He looked like exactly what he was, a federal investigator who had just finished a 6-month hunt. Preston remained frozen in his chair. The patronizing smirk had melted right off his face, leaving his features slack, pale, and devoid of their usual southern charm. He stared blankly at the men invading his sanctuary. His eyes darted from the gold badges on their chests to the thick manila folders Jared carried. I watched my husband try to process the visual anomaly. He looked directly at Jared, his brow furrowing in deep, panicked confusion. He searched his memory, trying to place the face, failing to recognize the man who had poured his ice water just 7 days prior. Narcissists rarely remember the service staff. They view waiters and drivers as invisible background props. That specific blind spot had just proven fatal. The lead marshal, a tall, imposing man with a closely cropped gray beard and a voice that sounded like grinding gravel, stepped up to the edge of the conference table. He did not introduce himself. He did not apologize for the interruption. He looked down at the seated real estate developer and delivered the final, devastating blow. "Preston Mercer," the marshal announced, the heavy baritone syllables echoing off the drywall. "We are executing federal warrants to seize your corporate assets, freeze your external holding accounts, and secure all your electronic devices." The silver-haired lawyer stopped shouting mid-sentence. His mouth snapped shut. The righteous indignation vanished from his eyes in a fraction of a second, swiftly replaced by cold, calculating self-preservation. He recognized the specific law enforcement terminology. He knew the vast, terrifying difference between a civil domestic dispute and a coordinated criminal raid. "You are currently the primary target of an active multi-agency federal investigation." The marshal continued reading directly from the top sheet of the warrant stack Jared handed him. "We are serving pending indictments for interstate wire fraud, investor embezzlement, and the aggravated identity theft of a minor." The moment the phrase identity theft hung in the stale, air-conditioned air, the dynamic of the room inverted. Preston legal team realized they had just been sitting at a table advocating for a man who had intentionally concealed a sprawling criminal enterprise inside a sworn financial disclosure document. If they continued to defend him in that specific room, under those specific circumstances, they risked becoming accessories to perjury and fraud. The silver-haired attorney did not hesitate for a single heartbeat. He took a deliberate, physical step away from Preston. He reached down, snapped the brass clasps of his leather briefcase shut, and pulled it off the table. His junior partner mirrored the exact movement, abandoning their client in perfect unison. They recognized radioactive criminal exposure. They were highly paid divorce litigators, not criminal defense attorneys. They were not going to risk their lucrative Alabama bar licenses to shield a man who had lied to them about embezzling millions of dollars. Preston sat isolated. The formidable legal fortress he had paid exorbitant hourly rates to construct evaporated into thin air. He looked to his left, then to his right, watching his defenders retreat toward the far corners of the room. The remaining color drained from his face until his skin resembled chalk. Sweat beaded along his hairline. "This is a mistake," Preston stammered. His voice cracked, producing a high, desperate sound that lacked any of its usual resonance. "My business is legitimate. I run commercial real estate developments. You have the wrong information. Someone fabricated those corporate documents. Someone set me up." He pushed himself up from the table, his ergonomic chair tipping backward and hitting the wall behind him. Blind panic seized his movements. His chest heaved as he searched for an escape route, but the marshals physically blocked the only exit. His eyes darted frantically around the oppressive gray room, skipping over the mediator, ignoring his retreating lawyers, and finally landing on me. I sat perfectly still. My hands remained folded neatly on the table. I did not smile. I did not flinch. I simply watched the structural collapse of a man who had tried to destroy my aging father and my teenage son. "She did this!" Preston shouted, extending a shaking, accusatory finger in my direction. The sheer terror and exhaustion warped his features into a mask of pure desperation. "She is a vindictive, crazy woman. She has been trying to ruin me because I asked for a divorce last week. She forged those supply chain ledgers to steal my money. You have to arrest her. She is the mastermind you want." His voice echoed loudly, a frantic, pathetic attempt to deploy the exact same narrative he had utilized in his emergency family court petition. He was clinging to the delusional hope that he could still manipulate reality by calling me unstable. He thought he could still control the narrative through sheer volume and intimidation. The lead marshal did not even look at me. He did not ask for my identification, nor did he acknowledge the frantic accusations echoing off the walls. The federal task force already possessed the unredacted digital logs, the missing decimal points from the supply chain invoices, and the IP addresses tracing the offshore transfers directly back to the wealth management firm. They possessed the sworn affidavit from Natalie, who had undoubtedly traded her testimony for leniency. They knew exactly who orchestrated the theft. The marshal reached into the utility pouch of his tactical vest. He pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. He did not speak another word to explain the situation. He simply leaned forward and slapped the metal restraints down onto the center of the conference table. The sharp, metallic clank resonated through the room. The sound sliced through Preston's hysterical defense, silencing him instantly. The steel links gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights sitting directly on top of the fraudulent financial disclosure form he had tried to force me to sign just 3 minutes earlier. The mediator, who had remained frozen in his chair at the head of the table since the door opened, slowly stood up and backed away toward the far wall. The neutral legal facility designed to mediate equitable asset distribution had instantly transformed into an active federal crime scene. Preston stared down at the handcuffs. His shaking hands hovered over the table. The reality of his situation finally pierced his towering hubris, shattering it into a million jagged pieces. He was not going to a tropical island estate. He was not going to secure guardianship over our teenage son to shield his stolen millions. He was going to a concrete holding cell in the basement of a federal courthouse. I kept my gaze fixed on his face, absorbing the exact moment his empire turned to dust. In aerospace auditing, watching a faulty system fail is never an emotional event. It is simply the inevitable mathematical result of bad engineering. Preston had built his entire life on a foundation of lies, theft, and exploitation. The collapse was always a certainty. I stood up, slowly smoothing the front of my tailored charcoal blazer. Veronica mirrored my movement, gathering her pristine legal pad and sliding it into her tote bag. We had accomplished our objective. The trap had snapped shut, leaving the predator caught firmly inside the steel teeth. The room belonged to the marshals now. The heavy steel handcuffs rested on the faux wood table. They sat directly over the fraudulent financial disclosure form. Preston stared down at the metal links. The patronizing smirk that had defined his features for 14 years dissolved into a mask of pure terror. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin the shade of old parchment. He looked incredibly small. The formidable real estate mogul had vanished, replaced by a cornered coward who finally realized the exit doors were locked. He lifted his head and looked across the wide table. His hazel eyes were wide and bloodshot. His chest heaved with shallow, panicked breaths. How Preston gasped. The single word shattered the heavy silence of the windowless room. His voice lacked any resonance. It was a hollow, desperate sound. He gripped the edge of the table as if the floor beneath him was giving way. "How did you find all this out since my birthday?" he stammered, his eyes darting between my face and the federal marshals standing behind him. "Who told you? Who gave you the offshore routing numbers?" I sat perfectly still. I looked at the man sitting opposite me. I studied the face of the husband who had tried to bankrupt my aging father. I examined the eyes of the father who had weaponized his own teenage son to shield a stolen fortune. For 6 long months, I had carried the crushing weight of his betrayal in utter silence. I had smiled over morning coffee while auditing his hidden ledgers. I had folded his laundry while mapping his corporate shell companies. The ultimate payoff was finally here. "I did not find out at your birthday," I said. My voice was steady, clear, and devoid of any sympathy. Preston blinked, his brow furrowed in deep confusion as his brain struggled to process the timeline I had just presented. 6 months ago, I explained keeping my posture rigid and authoritative. A group of your primary investors realized a recurring anomaly in your logistics ledgers. They noticed a fraction of a percentage missing from their quarterly returns. They could not trace the leak, so they hired an independent consultant to untangle the supply chain invoices. They hired an aerospace auditor. Preston stopped breathing. His jaw dropped slightly. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. You brought your work home, Preston, I continued. You connected your encrypted laptop to our local network. You trusted the residential firewall because you never understood the technology. You forgot that I built that network. You forgot what I do for a living. I found the missing decimal point on the very first night. He shook his head slowly, a gesture of pure denial. I was the anonymous whistleblower who triggered the Securities and Exchange Commission investigation. I stated delivering the truth like a surgical strike. I gathered the initial evidence. I handed the encrypted files to the federal task force. I hired Jared to map the physical locations of your dummy corporations. I knew about the embezzled funds, the fake contracting receipts, and the wealth management holding accounts long before you ever stood up to make that toast. The horror blooming across his face was mesmerizing. He had spent years underestimating the woman sitting across from him. He assumed my silence equated to ignorance. He believed my domestic compliance meant I was blind to his ambition. He never realized he was sharing a home with the architect of his destruction. Your grand birthday announcement was not a surprise, I said, leaning forward, resting my hands on the table. It was simply the moment you crossed the line from corporate fraud to personal destruction. You could have walked away. You could have left the marriage and faced the federal music alone, but you decided to forge my signature to leverage my father's property. You decided to steal Hunter's social security number. You brought the war into my house. Preston collapsed back into his ergonomic chair. His spine seemed to liquefy. He raised a trembling hand to his mouth, staring at me as if looking at a stranger. Jessica, please, he whispered. The arrogance was fully gone, replaced by a pathetic pleading tone. I am your husband. We built a life together. You cannot let them do this. We have a son. Think about Hunter. You lost the right to mention his name, I snapped, my voice turning to ice. You tried to frame him for a federal felony so you could drink cocktails on a tropical island. You were willing to let a 15-year-old boy take the fall for your greed. He reached across the table, his fingers stretching toward my folded hands. I need you to fix this, he begged. You can tell them it was a mistake. You can retract the evidence. I will give the money back. I will sign whatever you want. There is no money left to give back, I replied, pulling my hands away from his reach. The offshore pipeline is dead. Preston froze, his outstretched hand trembling in the empty space between us. Natalie surrendered the Cayman Island routing logs this morning, I revealed, twisting the final blade. She realized the scope of your identity theft and chose self-preservation. She reversed the lien on the mobile property and handed her unredacted terminal data to the authorities. She traded your freedom for her own leniency. His eyes widened further, the last remaining pillar of his escape plan crumbling into dust. And your mother, I added, ensuring every co-conspirator was accounted for. Virginia is currently facing an impending indictment for medical fraud. I traced the digital footprint of that fake psychological evaluation directly to her private clinic. She will lose her board seat, her social standing, and likely her freedom. You destroyed everyone who tried to help you. Preston let out a low, guttural sound, something between a sob and a gasp. The sheer magnitude of the trap I had built around him finally settled over his shoulders. He had walked into this room believing he held all the leverage. He thought the fraudulent disclosure document would secure his clean getaway. Instead, every single move he made had been anticipated, categorized, and weaponized against him. The lead marshal stepped forward, breaking the tension. He reached across the table and grabbed Preston by the shoulder of his custom charcoal suit. He hauled the real estate developer up from the chair with effortless strength. "Preston Mercer," the marshal intoned, his voice rigid and formal. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, investor embezzlement, and aggravated identity theft. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The marshal pulled Preston's arms behind his back. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked into place, locking around his wrists with a sharp, undeniable finality. Preston did not fight the restraints. The fight had been entirely drained from his body. He hung his head, his shoulders slumped forward, defeated by the very woman he had intended to discard. He looked over his shoulder one last time, his hazel eyes searching my face for any trace of mercy, any lingering shred of the love we once shared. He found nothing but cold, clinical detachment. I watched the marshals escort my husband toward the heavy oak door. Jared stood by the exit, holding the stack of warrants, his expression grim and satisfied. The investigator stepped aside, allowing the law enforcement officers to guide their prisoner out into the hallway. The door clicked shut, sealing the windowless conference room in profound silence. Veronica remained seated beside me. She meticulously organized her legal pad, clicking her silver pen shut. She did not offer a celebratory cheer. She understood the gravity of the moment. We had won the war, but the battlefield was still littered with the debris of a broken family. I exhaled a long, steady breath. The stale air of the legal facility tasted sweeter than it had an hour ago. The immediate threat was neutralized. The corporate empire was dismantled. My father coastal sanctuary was secure, and my son identity was protected. I had navigated the storm with surgical precision, surviving the betrayal by transforming myself into an unyielding force of nature. I picked up the forged financial disclosure document resting on the table. The bold blue ink of his signature stared back at me, a permanent record of his deceit. I slid the paper into my leather tote, a souvenir of the battle. The climax of the confrontation was over, but the aftermath awaited. It was time to leave the sterile confines of the city and return to the people who actually mattered. Exactly 14 months have passed since that heavy oak door clicked shut in the downtown Huntsville Mediation Center. The sprawling brick colonial in the Madison suburbs, the house with the perfectly manicured hedges and the oppressive silences, no longer belongs to me. A federal judge ordered the liquidation of our shared marital assets. The proceeds were cleanly divided, though the vast majority of Preston's supposed wealth evaporated under the harsh light of the Securities and Exchange Commission asset forfeiture protocols. The judge presiding over the family court docket reviewed the unredacted digital logs, the forged psychological evaluation, and the offshore holding accounts. He did not hesitate. He struck Preston's emergency petition from the record with extreme prejudice and granted me sole physical and legal custody of Hunter. The legal severing was swift, surgical, and permanent. Preston Mercer, a man whose entire identity was anchored in the acquisition of expansive luxury properties, now resides in an 8 by 10-foot concrete cell at a federal correctional institution in Florida. There are no panoramic windows. There are no custom Italian wool suits. He wears a standard-issue uniform and adheres to a strict schedule dictated by armed guards. He pleaded guilty to interstate wire fraud, investor embezzlement, an aggravated identity theft, to avoid a drawn-out trial that would have inevitably resulted in a much longer sentence. The real estate empire he built on a foundation of stolen capital was dismantled, piece by piece, auctioned off to reimburse the investors he defrauded. He spends his days confined to a space smaller than the walk-in closet where he used to hide his secrets. He has plenty of time to reflect on the missing decimal point that brought his kingdom down. The collateral damage extended far beyond my ex-husband. Virginia, the Huntsville socialite, who viewed public image as the ultimate currency, found herself entirely bankrupt in the only economy she cared about. The state medical board launched a rigorous inquiry into the forged psychiatric evaluation procured from her clinic. Facing a public hearing, she was forced to resign from her position as chairwoman in disgrace. The charity gala invitations stopped arriving. The country club acquaintances who used to kiss her cheek over Sunday brunch suddenly pretended not to see her in the grocery store aisles. Stripped of her influence and facing mounting legal fees, she quietly listed her estate for sale. She became a pariah in her own hometown, isolated by the toxic fallout of her own deceit. She tried to shield her son, and instead, she engineered her own social exile. Natalie did not fare any better. She traded her testimony for leniency, avoiding federal prison time, but the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority permanently revoked her fiduciary licenses. She was terminated from Sterling Wealth Management the same day the marshals raided the office. She is barred from the financial sector for life. The glamorous tropical escape she envisioned dissolved into a grim reality of crippling legal penalties and ruined professional prospects. Abigail, the woman who stood beside me for a decade while secretly leasing a luxury downtown loft for my husband, quietly packed her belongings and moved away. The revelation of her complicity spread through our mutual social circles like a localized wildfire. The admiration and envy she harbored turned into a stain she could not wash off. She fled to another state, hoping to outrun a reputation that will inevitably follow her. As for me, I did not stay in Huntsville to gloat over the ruins. I had no desire to build my future on a battlefield. I packed my belongings, collected my son, and relocated to the southern tip of the state. I moved into the very beachfront property Preston had tried so desperately to steal. The mobile cottage is a modest, weathered structure resting on wooden pilings above the white sand. It smells of dried sea salt, old pine, and the damp, earthy aroma of the Gulf Coast breeze. It lacks the smart home technology and the grand, sweeping staircases of the Madison estate, but it possesses something far more valuable. It possesses peace. I am sitting on the back porch right now. The wooden floorboards are warm beneath my bare feet. A mug of dark roast coffee rests on the railing. The late afternoon sun hangs low over the horizon, casting a brilliant golden light across the rolling surf. The tide is pulling back, leaving a smooth expanse of wet sand reflecting the pastel colors of the sky. Down near the water edge, Hunter is practicing his pitching mechanics. He wears a worn baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, winding up and hurling a baseball into a heavy canvas net we set up near the dunes. The rhythmic thwack of the leather ball hitting the target echoes over the sound of the crashing waves. He is 16 now, growing taller and stronger every day. He is undeniably safe. He knows his father is in prison for financial crimes, but he does not know the granular details of the offshore trusts. He does not know how close his own identity came to being destroyed. I absorbed that burden so he would never have to carry it. He gets to be a teenager, focused on his fastball and his impending driver license, unburdened by the treacherous ambitions of the man who left us behind. I watch the coastal wind ruffle his shirt, and a profound, quiet stillness settles over my chest. Society conditions us to believe that healing requires a grand cinematic climax. We expect tearful apologies, dramatic reconciliations, or profound declarations of remorse from the people who hurt us. We wait for the perpetrators to recognize our pain, assuming their validation is the key to our recovery. But true healing rarely arrives with a theatrical crescendo. It does not announce itself with a trumpet blast. Healing arrives in the quiet, unremarkable moments when you suddenly realize you are no longer carrying the weight of someone else's lies. It arrives when you wake up in the morning and your first thought is not about the betrayal, but about the smell of the ocean breeze coming through the open window. It arrives when you look at your own reflection and recognize a woman who refused to be a victim. A woman who looked at a collapsing foundation and decided to build something new from the bedrock up. I spent a decade operating in a world defined by the calculation of risk and the auditing of broken systems. I tracked missing variables and balanced complex ledgers. When my marriage failed, I applied those exact same principles to my survival. I did not rebuild my life around the betrayal. I built it around the undeniable truth. People often assume that revenge requires cruelty. They think vengeance is about inflicting pain matching the malice of your enemies and forcing them to suffer in equal measure. But descending into their darkness only tethers you to them forever. The most devastating revenge you can possibly enact upon those who try to destroy you is simply surviving them. It is walking away with your dignity entirely intact, proving that their worst efforts were not enough to break you. It is exposing the hollow core of their deceit with cold, calculated precision, one undeniable fact at a time. I sip my coffee, letting the bitter warmth ground me in the present moment. A flock of brown pelicans glides low over the water, riding the updrafts in a synchronized formation. The Gulf of Mexico stretches out before me, vast, untamed, and enduring. Preston thought he could erase me. He thought he could strip my resources, leverage my father's sanctuary, and frame my son, all while smiling over a birthday toast. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the woman sitting across the table from him. He saw a compliant wife. He failed to see the auditor. The ledger is finally balanced. The missing decimal points are accounted for. The accounts are settled. I set my ceramic mug down on the weathered wooden railing and take a deep breath of the coastal air. It tastes like salt resilience and pure freedom. When the dust finally settles on a shattered family, the most profound casualties are rarely the liquidated bank accounts, the tarnished social reputations, or the lost real estate. The true battlefield, and the most critical casualty, is the blueprint of the world we hand down to our children. My journey from the moment my husband stood at my 41st birthday dinner to announce our divorce, to the afternoon he was escorted away in federal handcuffs, was not merely a story of financial survival. It was, at its very core, a brutal and necessary reckoning about parenting responsibility and the generational curses we either perpetuate or destroy. In American culture, the traditional family structure is deeply revered, often idealized as an impenetrable sanctuary. We are conditioned from a young age to measure the success of a family by the tangible accumulation of its wealth, the sprawling brick colonial in the suburbs, the manicured lawns, the private school tuitions, and the pristine public image. My husband Preston and his mother Virginia were the quintessential architects of this American illusion. They believed that providing a child with financial abundance and elite social status was the ultimate fulfillment of parental duty. But in their relentless pursuit of the facade, they entirely abandoned the foundation. A home built on deceit, no matter how beautiful the crown molding or how expensive the zip code, is nothing more than a beautifully decorated trap. Virginia raised her son to believe that a polished image pardoned all sins. She taught him that morality was conditional, applicable only when people were watching, and easily bypassed if the financial reward was high enough. This is the inherent danger of raising children without emotional awareness or a fundamental sense of fairness. When a parent values optics over honesty, they do not raise a leader. They raise a predator. Preston learned to view the people around him, even his own wife and son, as expendable assets. He viewed our 15-year-old son, Hunter, not as a human being whose character needed to be nurtured, but as a 9-digit social security number to be weaponized for a money laundering scheme. The moment my husband tied those offshore Cayman Island accounts to his own child's identity, he committed the ultimate parental betrayal. He inverted the natural order of family responsibility. Instead of standing as a shield to protect his child from the cruelty of the world, he used his child as a shield to protect his own stolen fortune. Family responsibility extends far beyond simply keeping the lights on or funding a college savings account. It requires the exhausting, daily, unglamorous work of modeling absolute accountability. When a child sees a parent admit a mistake, accept the harsh consequences, and strive for restitution, they learn how to become honorable adults. Preston's inability to accept responsibility, his desperate attempts to frame me as mentally unstable to manipulate the family court system, and to steal from his own family, taught Hunter a profound, albeit painful, lesson about the destructive nature of cowardice. The ultimate tragedy of my ex-husband's life is that he was so obsessed with building a financial empire for his son to inherit that he destroyed the very moral character his son needed to survive it. Contrast Preston's hollow legacy with the one left by my own father. My dad spent 40 years working grueling shifts on the automotive assembly lines of Huntsville. He did not possess offshore trusts or luxury downtown lofts. He had a modest beachfront cottage in Mobile, Alabama, bought with the sweat of honest labor. He taught me how to cast a fishing line into the rolling surf, but more importantly, he taught me that true wealth is the ability to sleep at night with a clear conscience. That is the parenting value that saved my life. Because I was raised with an inherent, unshakable understanding of fairness and integrity, I was equipped to recognize and dismantle the staggering fraud my husband attempted to perpetrate. We pass down our emotional resilience just as surely as we pass down our eye color. To raise a child with true American values, the kind rooted in genuine hard work rather than superficial entitlement, requires an unflinching commitment to honesty. It means acknowledging that our children are watching exactly how we handle the darkest, most terrifying moments of our lives. When the crisis hit our home, my instinct was not to collapse into hysterics or to wage a screaming war in our hallways. It was to act with calculated, quiet dignity. Emotional awareness in parenting does not mean shielding your child from every conceivable hardship. It means demonstrating how to navigate a catastrophic storm without losing your moral compass. I did not lie to Hunter about his father's federal indictment, but I also did not poison him with the venom of my own broken marriage. I allowed the undeniable facts of Preston's criminal actions to speak for themselves, preserving my son's right to understand the truth without forcing him to carry the emotional burden of my grief. I audited my own soul to ensure my son would inherit a legacy of strength, not a legacy of bitterness. We are all actively writing the histories our children will one day read. We are demonstrating through every argument, every compromise, and every crisis what it actually means to be a partner and a parent. If this journey has resonated with you, and if it has prompted you to examine the bedrock of your own family structure and the quiet truths you are passing down to the next generation, I encourage you to follow Emily Told Stories. Join a community that values the unvarnished truth over the comfortable lie, and subscribe so you never miss a narrative that challenges the way we view the people closest to us. As I sit on the porch of our Mobile cottage today, watching my teenage son throw a baseball into a salt-sprayed canvas net, I am struck by a realization that defies almost everything society teaches us about motherhood and family duty. Conventional wisdom dictates that a parent's ultimate duty is to be a martyr for their children. We are repeatedly told to sacrifice our own happiness to quietly endure toxic marriages for the kids, and to absorb the abuses of our partners just to maintain the unbroken image of a traditional two-parent nuclear family. We are conditioned to believe that self-erasure is the highest, purest form of parental love. We are told that keeping the peace is more important than exposing the rot, but that is a beautiful, deeply destructive lie. Children do not need martyrs. They do not learn strength by watching their mothers shrink into the shadows of a deceitful marriage, pretending that a house built on lies is actually a home. They learn exactly what they are taught to tolerate. The most profound, fiercely protective act of love a parent can commit is not to sacrifice their own dignity, but to ruthlessly preserve it. By refusing to be a victim and by systematically destroying the man who sought to destroy me, I did not break my family. I saved my son from inheriting a blueprint of submission. The greatest inheritance you can leave your child is not the illusion of a perfect traditional home, but the undeniable, terrifying proof that they belong to someone who simply cannot be broken.